Chapter 1: Rust and Rot. The oversized tires of Marcus Thorne's black SUV crunched over gravel pitted with weeds. He pulled the vehicle to a halt beside a sagging chain-link fence topped with rusted concertina wire. Beyond it loomed the Lazarus Limbs Co. factory, a brick behemoth stained dark by decades of soot and neglect. Windows gaped like empty sockets, many boarded haphazardly, others showing only jagged shards of glass reflecting the overcast sky. Paint peeled from metal window frames in long strips, revealing pitted rust underneath. A faded sign, barely legible, hung askew above the main entrance. Lazarus Limbs Co. crafting a better tomorrow today. The irony wasn't lost on Alina Vance, seated beside him, clutching a thick roll of blueprints. Marcus cut the engine. The sudden silence pressed in, amplifying the faint groan of wind through the structure's broken shell. "Well," he announced, his voice overly bright in the confined space of the car, "here she is. Prime real estate once you scrape off the history." He gestured vaguely toward the factory. Alina didn't reply immediately. Her gaze traced the building's jagged roofline, the crumbling smokestack that listed slightly to one side, the sprawling wings that disappeared behind overgrown clusters of sumac and thorny bushes. It wasn't just dilapidated. It felt sullen, watchful. The survey reports mentioned significant structural issues, Marcus, especially the west wing roof and the foundation near the old boiler house. Details, details. Marcus waved a dismissive hand, already opening his door. That's what Frank and his boys are for. Knock down the bad bits, shore up the rest. Good bones, Alina. That's what this place has, you'll see. Luxury lofts, exposed brick, industrial chic. People pay a fortune for this aesthetic. He stepped out, adjusting the collar of his expensive sports coat against the chill breeze that carried the scent of damp earth, decay, and something else. A faint, metallic tang mixed with a cloying sweetness, like old disinfectant. Alina exited the car, pulling her own jacket tighter. The air felt heavy, damp. She glanced back at the road, a cracked asphalt ribbon disappearing into the scraggly woods that bordered the property. They were isolated here. No neighboring buildings, no passing traffic, just the factory and the trees. A battered pickup truck, its bed loaded with tools, generators, and coils of rope, rattled to a stop behind Marcus's SUV. Frank Ramirez climbed out, a stout man whose face seemed permanently set in a weary squint. He slammed the truck door shut with a resounding clang. Two younger men hopped out from the passenger side. Javier Rojas, wiry and restless, already pulling a smartphone from his pocket, and Sal Petrov, older, quieter, his movements deliberate as he surveyed the factory entrance. "Morning, boss, Ms. Vance." Frank's voice was gravelly. He nodded curtly, eyes already assessing the building's facade. "She looks worse up close." "Character, Frank, that's what we call it," Marcus beamed, slapping the foreman on the shoulder. "Ready to start making some noise?" "Ready to see what we're up against," Frank corrected. He pulled a heavy ring of keys from his pocket. "Got the main gate keys from the realtor. Said the power's disconnected at the pole, lines are shot anyway, water's off at the main. Place has been dead for 30, 40 years. He selected a large, corroded brass key and approached the main gate. The padlock looked ancient, a thick chunk of rust. It took considerable effort, Frank grunting before the mechanism yielded with a screech of protest. He swung the wide gate inward on groaning hinges. Javi, get the generator running. Sal, lights. Let's get some visibility inside the main hall first, Frank ordered. Ms. Vance, you planning on walking the interior now? Yes, Elena confirmed, unfurling the top sheet of her blueprints. I need to correlate these plans with the actual layout and assess the primary load-bearing structures before any significant demolition begins, especially around the central hall and the wing connections. Stick close then, Frank advised. Floors could be soft, no telling what's nested in there. Javier wrestled a portable generator from the truck bed, while Sal unloaded powerful work lights mounted on tripods. The generator sputtered to life with a roar, shattering the quiet. Sal connected the lights, their harsh white beams cutting through the gloom beyond the entrance. Marcus clapped his hands together. All right, team, let's see the guts of this beauty. He strode confidently through the gate. Elena and Frank followed, Javier and Sal trailing with the lights. The immediate entryway was a cavernous space, likely a former loading dock or reception area. Dust lay thick as snow on every surface. Cobwebs, dense and gray, draped from ceiling girders like macabre decorations. Piles of debris, crumbled plaster, broken glass, indeterminate heaps of rotting material littered the concrete floor. The air inside was colder, stagnant, thick with the smell of decay, intensified now, mingling with the sharp odor of rat droppings. Main assembly floor should be through here, Elena murmured, consulting her blueprint, her voice sounding small in the vast space. She pointed toward a set of large double doors, one hanging open, revealing darkness beyond. Sal positioned the first work light to illuminate the entryway, its beam carving a sharp path through the dust motes dancing in the air. Frank pushed the open door further, its hinges screaming. He shone a heavy-duty flashlight into the space beyond. The main assembly floor was enormous. Rows of heavy machinery, hulking shapes draped in shadows and dust, stood silent like tombs. Conveyor belts snaked between them, thick rubber cracked and brittle. Workstations littered with rusted tools, unrecognizable components, and drifts of hardened grime stood like abandoned altars. High above, catwalks crisscrossed the space, lost in the upper darkness where feeble light filtered through grimy, broken skylights far overhead. But it wasn't just machinery. Scattered everywhere, piled in corners, spilling from overturned bins hanging from hooks, were the factory's former products: prosthetic limbs, hands, arms, legs, feet. Some were archaic clockwork contraptions of brass and steel. Others were porcelain, eerily smooth and pale. Still others seemed disturbingly more advanced, incorporating plastics and metals in designs that mimicked human anatomy with unsettling accuracy. A pile of detached hands, palms up, seemed almost supplicating in the flashlight beam. A single child-sized leg, complete with scuffed shoe, lay near a pillar. Creepy, Javier muttered, panning his phone camera around slowly. Like a doll factory exploded. Focus, Javi, Frank grunted, his flashlight beam sweeping methodically across the floor, checking for obvious hazards. Watch your step. Looks like some of the floor plates are rusted through near that stamping press. Marcus wandered deeper, seemingly unfazed. Imagine this, Elena. Polished concrete floors, gallery lighting, maybe a microbrewery over where that weird clamping thing is. He gestured toward a complex piece of machinery bristling with adjustable arms and vices. Elena moved cautiously, comparing the layout to her plans. The plans indicate a large vat or tank system beneath this section of the floor, part of the later experimental phase, according to the addenda. She tapped a section of the blueprint near the center of the room. Access should be through maintenance hatches, but I don't see them marked clearly. Probably buried under this junk, Frank said, nudging a pile of discarded armatures with his boot. A cascade of metallic fingers clattered onto the concrete. We'll clear it section by section. Standard procedure. Sal set up the second work light, casting wider illumination across the central area. The sheer scale of the dereliction was overwhelming. Broken conduits hung like vines from the ceiling. Unidentifiable liquids stained the floor in dark, greasy patches, and everywhere the limbs. Hundreds, maybe thousands of them in various states of completion and decay. Some looked almost new, wrapped in disintegrating protective plastic. Others were mangled, broken, or seemed partially melted. This central press. Elena approached a truly massive machine in the room's heart. It rose 2 stories high, a complex tangle of hydraulics, gears, and heavy plates. It doesn't match the original factory inventory. She ran a gloved hand over a control panel coated in grime. Faded labels hinted at functions: biointegration cycle, organic compound feed, neural pathway calibration. This must be from Dr. Finch's later work, the controversial stuff. Controversial cells, Marcus chirped, peering at a row of porcelain hands arranged neatly on a dusty shelf. Adds character, a story. Frank snorted. Yeah, a story about a guy who got shut down for playing God with spare parts. He directed his flashlight beam upwards. Ceiling beams look mostly intact here, but there's water damage near the south wall. We'll need to check the roof integrity before bringing heavy equipment inside. Javier, meanwhile, had deployed a small drone. The quadcopter buzzed upwards, its small camera relaying footage to his phone. Getting a view of the catwalks now. Lots of debris up there. Hey, is that? He squinted at his screen. Looks like nests or something, big ones. Rats, birds? Elena asked, looking up into the gloom. Maybe, Javier said, his voice hesitant. Hard to tell there, bulky and dark. The drone whirred, moving further down the length of the vast room. Sal, methodically checking the perimeter, stopped near a doorway marked Quality Control. Unlike the main doors, this one was heavy steel, dented and scratched but firmly closed. He tried the handle. Locked. He shone his light on the lock mechanism. It was newer, more industrial than the other fittings, showing less corrosion. This one's different, he called out, his voice echoing slightly. Frank walked over. Locked. Plans show it accessing offices and maybe the labs. He examined the heavy steel door. Looks like it was reinforced. Maybe Finch wanted to keep his secrets safe, Marcus suggested with a smirk. Or keep something in. He chuckled, but it sounded hollow in the dead air of the factory. Elena felt a prickle of unease. The sheer volume of discarded limbs was unsettling enough, but the advanced nature of some, combined with the strange machine labels and the reinforced door, painted a disturbing picture. What exactly was Dr. Finch doing here before it was shut down? The official records were vague, citing funding irregularities and ethical concerns. Drone picking up something weird in the West Wing, Javier announced, tapping his screen. Thermal signature, faint but definitely there. Doesn't look like an animal. What? Frank frowned, moving closer to Javier. Let me see. Before Javier could show him, a loud bang echoed from deep within the factory, followed by the protracted screech of tortured metal. It wasn't an external sound. It came from somewhere inside the structure, further in. Everyone froze. The generator's steady hum seemed suddenly louder in the ensuing silence. "What was that?" Marcus asked, his bravado faltering slightly. Frank held up a hand, listening intently. His eyes scanned the shadowed corners of the assembly hall. "Settling," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Old buildings make noise." Sal shifted his weight, his hand moving instinctively toward the heavy wrench hanging from his tool belt. Elena consulted her blueprints again, her fingers tracing the lines nervously. That sounded like it came from the direction of the old boiler house wing. The plans show it's structurally separate, connected only by a ground floor corridor. "Could be scrap thieves," Frank muttered, directing his flashlight beam toward the far end of the hall, toward the general direction of the sound. "Or squatters. We should check it out. Stick together." "Scrap thieves," Marcus scoffed, regaining some composure. "Who'd want this junk?" He kicked at a nearby pile of metal leg braces which clattered noisily. As the sound died away, another noise became apparent. A faint, rhythmic clicking. It was soft, easily lost beneath the generator's thrum, but persistent. Click, click, click. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You hear that?" Javier asked, lowering his drone controller slightly. Elena strained her ears. Click, click, click. Was it water dripping, cooling metal, or something else? It had an odd regularity, a mechanical precision that didn't sound natural. Frank swept his flashlight beam across a row of dormant machinery. The beam caught something, a glint of movement near the base of the giant central press. He held the light steady. A single porcelain prosthetic hand lay on the grimy floor. As they watched, one of its fingers twitched, curling inward slightly. Then another. Click. The hand spasmed, fingers flexing, before becoming still again. Silence descended, thick and heavy, broken only by the generator's hum and the now undeniable rhythmic clicking that seemed to emanate from the very walls around them. Marcus Thorne stared at the hand, his face pale, his earlier confidence evaporated. "Okay," he breathed, his voice barely a whisper. Maybe not just settling." Frank Ramirez raised his flashlight higher, its beam cutting deeper into the factory's shadowed recesses. He took a step forward, his other hand tightening its grip on a heavy spanner he'd picked up from a nearby workbench. The chapter of demolition had paused. A new, far more unsettling chapter felt like it was just beginning. Chapter 2: Echoes in the Steel. The silence stretched, taut and fragile, amplifying the rhythmic click, click, click. that seemed to seep from the very concrete beneath their boots. Javier lowered his drone controller slowly, his eyes fixed on the porcelain hand lying near the massive central press. Marcus swallowed hard, the sound audible in the stillness. Even Frank Ramirez, gripping the heavy spanner, hesitated, his usual blunt momentum momentarily checked. Static discharge, Javier offered, his voice thin. Old wiring, maybe, could make something twitch. There's no power connected to the building, kid, Frank stated flatly, his gaze sweeping the shadowed upper reaches of the assembly hall, then returning to the hand. Lines are dead at the pole. He took a cautious step forward, the crunch of his boot on gritty debris sounding unnaturally loud. He prodded the porcelain hand with the toe of his heavy work boot. It didn't move. He nudged it again, harder. Nothing. It lay inert, a piece of discarded medical history. See, Marcus exhaled, a shaky attempt at relief. Just settling. Old springs inside it, maybe, temperature change. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to recapture his earlier poise. Right, let's not get spooked by dust bunnies and old junk. Alina, you were saying something about the foundation near the boiler house. That noise came from that direction. Alina nodded, though her eyes kept drifting back to the motionless hand. The blueprints show a connecting corridor. If something collapsed back there, it could affect the main hall's stability eventually. We should assess the damage. She consulted the large sheet again. The corridor access seems to be at the far end, past this section of machinery. All right. Frank straightened up, accepting the explanation for now, though his expression remained wary. The spanner stayed firmly in his grip. Javi, Sal, bring the lights, stick close, no wandering off. He started walking toward the assembly hall's rear, his flashlight beam cutting a path through the forest of silent machines. The clicking sound persisted. Click, click, click. It seemed to follow them, a maddening, almost subliminal pulse beneath the generator's hum. Alina found herself listening intently, trying to pinpoint its origin. Was it louder near certain machines? Did it echo from the catwalks above? It remained frustratingly omnidirectional, an ambient heartbeat of the dead factory. They moved deeper into the vast space. The air grew heavier, colder. More piles of limbs appeared in the shifting cones of light, some neatly boxed, coated in decades of grime, others strewn carelessly, creating grotesque sculptures of anatomical fragments. A cluster of artificial eyes mounted on a testing rig seemed to watch them pass, their glass surfaces reflecting the work lights with unnerving intensity. Javier kept his drone airborne, hovering cautiously ahead of the group. Still getting that thermal reading from the west wing, he reported, his gaze fixed on his phone screen. It's faint, like residual heat, but it's not dissipating. And there's interference. Getting glitches in the video feed when I fly the drone near that central press machine. Interference from what? Marcus demanded. There's nothing powered in here. Dunno, Javier shrugged, tapping controls. Maybe the sheer amount of metal, or something in the machine itself. It's weird. As they passed a towering machine press, Sal, bringing up the rear with the second tripod light, stumbled slightly. A heavy wrench clattered down from a greasy overhead girder, landing point first on the concrete inches from his boot with a loud clang that made everyone jump. Whoa, Javier yelped, spinning around. Frank's flashlight beam shot upwards. The girder was coated in thick grime and cobwebs. Nothing else seemed disturbed. "Careful," Frank barked, though aimed at no one in particular. "Everything up there is loose, could come down any time." Sal stared up at the girder, then down at the wrench, his usual quiet demeanor ruffled for a moment. He picked it up, testing its weight, before securing it to his tool belt without a word. An accident, or was Frank's earlier assessment about the building making noise an understatement? They reached the rear section of the assembly hall. Here, the clutter was denser, the shadows deeper. A wide corridor, choked with debris and collapsed shelving, branched off to the right, presumably towards the boiler house wing where the noise had originated. Straight ahead was the heavy steel door Sal had noted earlier, marked Quality Control. "All right, let's check out this noise first," Frank decided, gesturing toward the debris-filled corridor. "Javi, see if you can get the drone down there. Give us a look before we try to push through this mess." Javier nodded, expertly maneuvering the drone toward the corridor entrance. Its small spotlight cut into the darkness. The screen on his controller showed a narrow passage blocked by fallen ductwork, overturned cabinets, and heaps of unidentifiable rubbish. "Blocked solid about 20 feet in," he reported. "Looks like a ceiling collapse. Can't see past it." "Damn," Frank kicked at a piece of fallen plaster. "Means we'd have to clear it by hand to see what happened back there. Take hours. And I don't like the look of that ceiling." Marcus frowned impatiently. "So, dead end. We can't leave a potential structural collapse unchecked, Frank." "We check it from the outside later," Frank countered. "Or find another way around. Right now, let's stick to Ms. Vance's primary survey. What's next on the list, Elena?" Elena pointed towards the reinforced steel door. "According to the later revisions of the plans, this door leads to what Dr. Finch labeled the biointegration lab and associated research offices. It connects indirectly to the west wing, where Javi's picking up that thermal reading." She hesitated. "It might offer a clearer route, or at least give us insight into what was happening in this part of the factory." "Biointegration lab," Marcus mused, rubbing his chin. "Sounds fancy, probably where the real money was. Let's see it." He strode toward the steel door. "Hold up," Frank warned, moving to intercept him. "Sal said this lock looks newer, reinforced. Might be a reason for that. Let's check it properly." He examined the heavy-duty lock mechanism. It was a complex tumbler lock designed for security, not just keeping honest people out. Scratches marred the metal around the keyhole. Someone tried getting through this before, or out. "Can you open it?" Marcus asked impatiently. Frank shook his head. "Not without the key or specialized tools. We could cut it, but that'll take time and make a hell of a racket." "What about that drone thermal?" Elena asked, looking at Javier. "Does the signature seem stronger near this area?" Javier checked his screen again. "Hard to say precisely with all this metal, but yeah, the general direction of the west wing is through there." He pointed the drone toward the steel door, letting it hover near the top. "Getting more interference here too. Signals jumpy." As the drone hovered, a low hum began to emanate from the wall around the door frame. It wasn't the generator. It was a deeper, resonant frequency, felt more than heard. The bare bulb overhead flickered erratically. Dust sifted down from the ceiling near the door hinges. Click, 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 click. The rhythmic clicking sound suddenly intensified, becoming faster, sharper, like a frantic telegraph transmission. It seemed to coalesce, originating now directly from the steel door itself. Okay, that's not normal, Javier breathed, backing away slightly. The humming grew louder, vibrating the floor beneath their feet. The steel door shuddered visibly in its frame. A fine shower of rust particles rained down from the top hinge. "Back up," Frank yelled, pushing Marcus and Alina away from the door. Sal had already retreated, his hand on the heavy wrench at his belt. With a sudden, violent screech of protesting metal, the lock mechanism on the steel door clicked loudly, and the heavy door swung inward about 6 inches, stopping abruptly. Darkness lay beyond, thick and absolute. The humming ceased instantly. The rapid clicking stopped, replaced by the original, slow, rhythmic click, 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 seemingly back to its ambient, dispersed state. They stared at the partially open door, stunned into silence. Did it just unlock itself? Marcus stammered, his voice incredulous. "Looks like it," Frank said grimly. He shone his flashlight into the gap. The beam penetrated only a few feet, revealing the start of a tiled corridor, disturbingly clean compared to the assembly hall. No immediate threats were visible, but the darkness felt heavy, watchful, and cold. A chill draft, carrying a strange antiseptic smell mixed with something vaguely organic and unpleasant, flowed out from the opening. "What do we do?" Alina asked, her voice low. Frank weighed the spanner in his hand. Someone or something maybe wanted us to open it, or maybe it was just pressure release system failure. He didn't sound convinced by the latter. "I don't like it, feels like a trap." "But the West Wing," Marcus gestured vaguely. "The valuable stuff, the labs, they're likely through there. We came here to assess the whole property." His developer instincts warred visibly with his fear. The potential value hidden behind that door was a powerful lure. Alina checked her blueprints again. This corridor should lead to a series of smaller rooms, offices, storage, then the main lab complex deeper in, if the plans are accurate. She looked at Frank. It might be the only way to access that wing internally without going outside or clearing the collapsed passage. Frank hesitated. Entering that doorway felt profoundly wrong. Every instinct screamed caution. But Marcus was the client, and assessing the property was their job. Delaying meant facing Thorne's wrath and potential contract issues. He looked at Sal, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. He looked at Javi, who seemed torn between curiosity and apprehension. "All right," Frank decided, his voice tight. "We check it out, slowly, carefully. Javi, keep that drone in front of us. Sal, you take rear guard. Nobody touches anything unless I say so. If anything seems off, anything at all, we pull back immediately. Understood?" Everyone nodded. The allure of the unknown, mixed with a heavy dose of dread, propelled them forward. Frank took the lead, pushing the heavy door open further. It moved silently now on well-oiled hinges, starkly contrasting its earlier protest. He stepped across the threshold, flashlight beam sweeping ahead. Alina followed closely, blueprints clutched tight. Marcus entered next, trying to project confidence he clearly didn't possess. Javi piloted the drone just ahead of Frank, its light bobbing in the darkness. Sal brought up the rear, positioning the second work light just inside the doorway to illuminate their entry point, his eyes constantly scanning the assembly hall behind them before he stepped through and pulled the door partially closed, leaving it slightly ajar. The corridor beyond was lined with pale, faintly grimy tiles. Doors lined both sides, most closed, some labeled with faded lettering. Specimen storage, calibration suite, Finch office. The air was noticeably colder here and the antiseptic smell stronger, overlaid with that faint, sickly sweet organic undertone. The rhythmic clicking was softer here, almost inaudible, replaced by the low hum of the drone and their own footsteps echoing on the tiles. Place looks almost sterile compared to out there, Marcus observed, his voice hushed. Too sterile, Frank muttered. He stopped, shining his light on the floor tiles. They were unnaturally clean, with none of the thick dust and debris covering the assembly hall. Yet faint scuff marks and peculiar, dark stains patterned the floor, suggesting recent activity despite the decades of abandonment. Javier directed the drone toward the first door on the right, specimen storage. Want me to peek inside? Frank nodded. Javi carefully maneuvered the drone toward the door handle, then hovered. Locked. He tried the next door, calibration suite. Locked too. He moved toward the door marked Finch office. This one. Wait. He zoomed the drone's camera in. The door was slightly ajar. A thin sliver of darkness showed within. Careful, Elena warned. Javier nudged the drone forward. It pushed the office door open a few more inches. The drone's light pierced the interior. It revealed a large, wood-paneled office, surprisingly intact. A heavy desk dominated the room, its surface littered with papers, strange metallic instruments, and what looked like disassembled prosthetic components. A tall filing cabinet stood against one wall, drawers slightly open. Bookshelves lined another wall, filled with thick volumes. But the focal point was the high-backed leather chair behind the desk. It was turned away from them, facing the wall. "Anyone there?" Frank called out, his voice sharp. No reply. He motioned for the others to stay put and approached the office doorway cautiously, spanner held ready. He pushed the door fully open and swept his flashlight beam across the room. Empty, except for the chair. He moved toward the desk, his light playing over the scattered contents. Diagrams showing bizarre fusions of mechanics and anatomical drawings. Notes filled with cramped handwriting discussing neural feedback loops and tissue rejection rates. A tarnished silver picture frame lay face down. He reached the chair, took a breath, and nudged it with the head of the spanner. The chair rotated slowly, smoothly. It was empty, but the leather of the seat and back was stained with a large, dark, dried patch that looked disturbingly like old blood. And resting on the seat, placed precisely in the center, was a single, intricately crafted clockwork hand, its brass fingers curled loosely around a small, leather-bound diary. Before anyone could react to the discovery, a sudden, ear-splitting scraping sound erupted from behind them, back down the corridor toward the assembly hall. It was the sound of heavy metal dragging forcefully across concrete. Sal spun around, raising his work light. The beam illuminated the corridor back toward the entrance. The heavy steel door they had entered through was closed. and judging by the deep, fresh gouges scoring the tile floor in front of it, something immense had just dragged itself into place, sealing them inside. Chapter 3: Dead Air and Diagrams. The reverberating boom of the steel door slamming shut echoed down the tiled corridor, followed by the grating shriek of metal digging into the floor. Silence crashed back in, heavier than before, thick with the dust motes dancing in Sal's work light beam, now fixed unwaveringly on the sealed exit. Deep, parallel gouges, raw and metallic, scarred the pale tiles leading up to the door's base, testament to an immense force having dragged something heavy, or the door itself, into a blocking position from the other side. What the hell was that? Marcus spun around, his voice cracking. He lunged toward the door, grabbing the cold steel handle and rattling it uselessly. Locked. It's jammed or blocked, Frank. Frank was already there, pushing Marcus aside gently but firmly. He shone his flashlight along the door seams, examining the deep gouges in the floor. Blocked, he confirmed, his voice grim. Something heavy slid into place on the assembly side. Hydraulic press part maybe, or something else. He pressed his ear against the cold steel, listening intently for several seconds. He shook his head. Nothing moving out there now. Quiet. Quiet, Marcus almost shrieked. We're trapped in here. That thing tried to crush Sal. It locked us in. Panic isn't helping, Mr. Thorne, Alina stated, her voice steady despite the tremor she fought to keep hidden. She approached the door, running her gloved fingers along the score marks in the tiles. These aren't random scrapes. They're deliberate, parallel. She looked at the dense metal of the door. Whatever moved this did so with precision. Javier had instinctively raised his phone, recording the sealed door and the gouges. Drones lost connection to the outside hub, he reported, his fingers flying across the screen. Completely cut off. No signal getting through that door or these walls. He looked up, his face pale in the reflected light. We're cut off. Totally. Sal remained silent, his back to the sealed door, his posture alert. He methodically swept the beam of the work light back down the corridor, into the darkness they hadn't yet explored, then back toward the office where Frank still stood near the blood-stained chair. His gaze lingered on the shadows, watchful. All right, Frank straightened up, turning away from the impassable door. His gaze was hard. No point wasting time here. We find another way out. Ms. Vance, these plans. He gestured towards the blueprints Alina held. Show another route, emergency exit, anything. Alina quickly unrolled the relevant section, spreading it against the tiled wall under the beam of Frank's flashlight. This wing connects internally to the main west wing structure. According to this schematic, there should be a fire exit stairwell at the far end of this lab complex. She traced a line with her finger, but it passes through the main biointegration laboratory space first. And there's a note here, added in pencil, different handwriting. She squinted. West Wing access, sealed post-incident, 7B containment protocol active. Containment protocol, Marcus repeated, aghast. What does that mean? It means Dr. Finch didn't want whatever he was working on getting out, Frank interpreted grimly. Or anyone getting in. He looked back toward the office. Let's see what the good doctor left behind. Maybe that diary has some answers. They regrouped cautiously at the office doorway. Frank stepped inside again, followed by Alina. Marcus hesitated, peering nervously past them. Javi stayed near the threshold, piloting the drone inside to provide wider illumination. Sal remained positioned just outside in the corridor, watching their backs. Frank picked up the small, leather-bound diary from the chair, handling it carefully. He handed it to Alina. "You're better at deciphering this academic stuff." He then examined the clockwork hand resting beside it. It was beautifully made, intricate gears and levers visible beneath plates of polished brass. He picked it up. It felt heavy, cold. He turned it over. Tucked into the palm, almost hidden by the curled fingers, was a small, tightly folded piece of paper. He carefully extracted it, using the tip of a pen from the desk. Alina, meanwhile, opened the diary. The pages were filled with dense, cramped script, dated entries interspersed with complex diagrams and chemical formulae. The ink was faded in places, water-stained in others. The last entry was dated nearly 40 years ago. "Anything useful?" Marcus pressed, hovering impatiently. Alina scanned the pages quickly. It's highly technical, details of experiments, tissue sourcing, rejection issues. Her voice trailed off as she read a passage. He talks about failures, unforeseen mutations, unstable integration leading to aggressive rejection, component animation independent of central command. She looked up, her expression disturbed. "The baseline organic matrix exhibits emergent properties beyond initial parameters, requires containment refinement. Project Chimera progresses, but the discarded elements, they remember their assembly." "Component animation," Javier repeated from the doorway, "like that hand out there." Frank unfolded the small piece of paper he'd found in the clockwork hand. It wasn't paper. It felt like thin parchment or treated vellum. Drawn on it in faded ink was a crude map. It didn't resemble Alina's official blueprints. It showed the lab complex, but with additional corridors marked, chambers labeled with cryptic symbols instead of names, and one area circled heavily. A large central chamber designated only as the heart. A winding path was drawn from Finch's office, bypassing several marked areas, leading toward this central chamber. A single word was scribbled beneath it: control. "What is that?" Alina asked, peering over Frank's shoulder. "Looks like Finch's private map," Frank muttered, "showing routes he didn't put on the official plans, and something called the heart." He compared it mentally to Alina's blueprints. "This central chamber, it seems to be located beneath the main biointegration lab, aligning roughly with where Javi was getting that thermal reading." "Control," Marcus latched onto the word. "Control for what? The factory systems, security." A gleam entered his eyes, momentarily eclipsing his fear. "If we can access the control system, maybe we can override the doors, get out of here." "Or maybe it's control for whatever Finch built down there," Frank countered darkly. "We don't know what we're dealing with." He shone his light around the office again. The blood stain on the chair seemed darker now. The scattered papers on the desk held complex anatomical drawings fused with mechanical schematics, designs far beyond simple prosthetics. One detailed drawing showed a human spine interwoven with metallic conduits and wiring. Another depicted a brain casing attached to complex optical sensors. Alina picked up a heavy sheaf of papers from the desk, research logs. These are logs from Project Chimera, dated after the diary entries end. She flipped through them. He was trying to create a networked consciousness, using multiple biological sources integrated with the factory's core systems. He thought discarded parts, residual biomatter, could be repurposed, linked. She stopped, paling. He refers to the factory itself as the primary vessel. He wasn't just making limbs. He was trying to make the building alive. A sudden metallic clatter from the corridor made them all jump. Sal shifted instantly, aiming his light. Nothing, just silence. Nerves, Marcus breathed, wiping sweat from his brow. Maybe, Frank said, unconvinced. He looked at the crude map, then at Alina. This heart chamber, any idea what it corresponds to on the real plans? Alina cross-referenced the sketch with her blueprints. The location seems to match a large, subterranean area marked as waste processing and reclamation. It's directly below the main lab floor. Waste processing, Frank repeated slowly. All those failed experiments, the discarded tissues Finch wrote about. The discarded elements. They remember their assembly. Alina quoted softly from the diary, a chill running down her spine. The faint, rhythmic clicking sound returned, seemingly louder now, emanating not from the assembly hall but from deeper within the lab complex ahead of them. Click, click, click. Okay, Frank decided, folding the crude map carefully and tucking it into his breast pocket. Sitting here isn't helping. Thorne might be right about one thing: if there's a control system, it might be our only way out. But we proceed according to Finch's map cautiously. It might lead us around the worst of whatever's woken up in here. He looked at the others. Agreed. Marcus nodded eagerly. Alina gave a hesitant agreement. Javier adjusted the drone's position. Sal merely gave a curt nod, his attention still focused down the unexplored corridor. They left the unsettling office, Frank taking the lead again, using the crude map and his flashlight to guide them. Javi kept the drone hovering close, its light supplementing Frank's beam. Alina walked beside Frank, comparing the map to her official plans, trying to reconcile the discrepancies. Marcus followed closely behind them, casting nervous glances over his shoulder. Sal brought up the rear, his work light beam cutting wide arcs, ensuring nothing crept up behind them in the echoing silence, broken only by their footsteps, the drone's hum, and the persistent, guiding click. Click, click. The corridor twisted, diverging from the layout on Alina's blueprints. Finch's map led them past more locked steel doors, incubation, neural interface, vivisection prep, the names alone sending shivers down their spines. The antiseptic smell intensified, mingling with a stronger organic odor like spoiled meat and ozone. The temperature continued to drop. Condensation plumed with their breaths. According to Finch's map, they needed to bypass the main lab area and access a service tunnel that should lead down towards the waste processing, or heart chamber. The route led them toward a door simply marked Storage B. Unlike the others, this door showed signs of damage, dents, scratches, and slight warping, as if something had tried to force its way out or in. The handle turned. Frank paused, listening intently. Silence from within. He pushed the door open slowly. It opened into a small storage room lined with metal shelves. But the shelves weren't filled with supplies. They were crammed with jars. Hundreds of glass jars of varying sizes, filled with murky preserving fluid and specimens. Twisted knots of tissue, malformed organs fused with wires, disembodied eyes floating sightlessly, pale hands with too many fingers. Several jars lay shattered on the floor, their contents spilled in dark, viscous puddles that shimmered wetly in the light. God, Marcus gagged, stumbling back. Elena averted her eyes, bile rising in her throat. Frank swept his light across the room. Toward the back, partially obscured by a row of shelves, was another doorway, matching the location of the service tunnel entrance on Finch's map. But something else caught his eye. Movement. On the far wall near the ceiling, a cluster of dark shapes shifted. His light snapped onto them. Rats. Normal rats, perhaps, driven into the labs by the demolition noise. But then he saw it. Embedded in the fur of one was a glint of metal, a shard protruding near its eye. Another seemed to have wires trailing from its hind leg, fused into the flesh. These were the integrated rats Elena had theorized about from Finch's notes. They watched the intruders with unnatural stillness, their eyes like tiny black beads reflecting the light. Suddenly from the floor came a wet, skittering sound. Frank lowered his beam. One of the spilled puddles of organic goo rippled. A pseudopod of viscous fluid lashed out, then retracted. From another shattered jar, a pale, multi-fingered hand, trailing strands of tissue, began to pull itself across the floor using its fingertips. It moved with jerky, unnatural speed. Click, scratch, click, scratch. "Get back," Frank ordered, shoving Elena and Marcus toward the corridor. Javier gasped, aiming his phone camera. "Did you see that?" More movement. From behind a shelf, another hand, this one more skeletal, fused with clockwork gears, scuttled into view. Then another, dragging a length of optic nerve like a tail. The scuttling limbs. Finch's diary wasn't just theory. Sal stepped forward, placing himself between the others and the advancing horrors. He swung the heavy tripod leg of the work light like a club, smashing one of the clockwork hands into fragments of brass and bone. The multi-fingered fleshy hand leaped towards his leg. He kicked it hard, sending it skidding across the tiles where it lay twitching. "The door," Frank yelled, pointing towards the service tunnel entrance at the back of the storage room. "We need to get through that door, now." He pushed past the shelves, avoiding the grasping horrors emerging from the shadows and spilled jars. Elena was right behind him. Marcus scrambled after them, whimpering. Javier kept filming, backing towards the door. Frank reached the service tunnel door. Heavy steel like the others, but with a simple wheel lock mechanism. He grabbed the wheel and strained. Rust and disuse made it stiff. Behind them, Sal kicked away another scuttling hand. The integrated rats on the wall began to chatter, a high-pitched, unnerving sound. One launched itself from the shelf, aiming for Sal's head. He ducked, and it slammed into the wall behind him. "Almost got it," Frank grunted, putting his shoulder into the wheel. With a groan of protesting metal, the locking bars began to retract. Javier yelped as a porcelain hand clamped onto his ankle. He stumbled, his phone clattering to the floor but continuing to record, pointed upwards. Sal swung the tripod again, shattering the porcelain fingers. The door clicked open. Frank yanked it inward, revealing a dark, narrow shaft descending into blackness, metal rungs set into slimy brickwork. A gust of cold, foul air, thick with the stench of decay and chemicals, billowed out. "Go, go," Frank urged, pushing Alina toward the opening. Alina hesitated for only a second, then swung onto the ladder and began to descend into the oppressive darkness. Marcus scrambled after her, nearly knocking her off balance. "Javi, move," Frank yelled. Javier scooped up his phone, his face ashen, and practically threw himself into the shaft, feet finding the rungs below Marcus. Frank turned back. Sal was holding his ground near the corridor entrance, using the work light defensively, keeping the growing number of twitching, scuttling limbs at bay. The rats were swarming down the shelves now. "Sal, come on," Frank shouted. Sal glanced back at him, then deliberately kicked the tripod base, sending the powerful work light crashing to the floor. It sputtered, illuminating the storage room in strobing flashes, then died, plunging the space into near darkness, save for the dim glow from the corridor and the drone hovering near the shaft entrance. In the chaotic flashes, Frank saw Sal draw the heavy wrench he'd picked up earlier. Then Sal turned and sprinted toward the shaft. He leaped onto the rungs just as Frank started his own descent, pulling the heavy steel door closed above them. It slammed shut with a clang, cutting off the skittering sounds and plunging them into absolute blackness, broken only by the small light from Javi's drone hovering nervously near the top of the shaft and the beam from Frank's flashlight pointing downwards. The last thing Frank heard before the door sealed completely was a high-pitched, unified chattering sound from the rats, unlike any natural rodent noise he'd ever encountered. Below them, the shaft descended into the unknown, toward the chamber Finch had called the heart. Chapter 4: The Underbelly. Darkness swallowed them. Absolute, pressing darkness, broken only by the narrow beam of Frank's heavy-duty flashlight slicing downwards, and the smaller, jittery spotlight from Javi's drone hovering near the top of the shaft, its operator currently preoccupied with clinging tightly to the rungs. The heavy clang of the steel door slamming shut above echoed unnervingly down the cylindrical brick shaft, sealing them in a vertical tomb. Cold, fetid air puffed upwards, thick with the stench of stagnant water, chemical residue, and something else. A heavy, metallic organic odor like blood mixed with engine oil. "Everyone okay?" Frank's voice, tight and controlled, bounced off the curved walls. His light momentarily swept upwards, catching the pale, wide-eyed faces of the others clinging to the ladder above him. Marcus was breathing heavily, almost hyperventilating. Alina's knuckles were white where she gripped the rung. Javi fumbled with his phone, trying to secure it better while maintaining his hold. Sal, just below the now-sealed door, was a steady silhouette against the drone's light, his head tilted as if listening to the bricks themselves. "Just peachy," Marcus gasped, his voice thin and reedy. "Trapped in a sewer pipe with crawling hands and attack rats behind us. What's next? Alligators." "Quiet," Frank commanded, not unkindly. "Save your breath. We need to keep moving down, slow and steady. Watch your footing, these rungs are slick." He directed his beam downwards again. The shaft descended further than the light could penetrate, disappearing into a black void. Slimy water trickled down the brickwork, glistening where the light caught it. Patches of dark mold or fungus clung to the walls. Alina took a deep, steadying breath, the foul air scratching at her lungs. The plans showed this shaft terminates in the waste processing area. How far down? Frank consulted Finch's crude map again, holding it close to the flashlight beam. Doesn't give a depth, just shows it opening into a larger chamber network. He resumed his descent, testing each rung before putting his full weight on it. Let's move. The descent was arduous, nerve-wracking. The metal rungs were indeed slick with decades of damp and grime. Their hands grew sore, their arms ached from the strain. The only sounds were their own ragged breaths, the drip, drip, drip of unseen water, the low hum of the drone which Javi managed to pilot downward slowly ahead of Frank, and the scrape of their boots against brick. The rhythmic click, click, click that had haunted them above seemed absent here, replaced by a low, almost subaudible thrumming vibration that seemed to emanate from the earth below, felt more through the soles of their boots and the palms of their hands than heard. How deep is this thing? Marcus panted after several minutes of slow descent. He risked a glance downwards into the darkness Frank's light cut through. Are we underground? Sub-basement level according to the schematics, Alina replied, her voice strained. Below the main factory floor. Lazarus Limbs wasn't just building on ground level. Finch excavated significantly for his later projects. Great, Marcus muttered, deeper into the damn tomb. Javier, piloting the drone cautiously downward, spoke up, his voice tight. Drone picking up. Something below. Not a solid floor yet, but structures, pipes maybe, walkways, and movement. Movement. Frank stopped, holding his light steady, pointing straight down. What kind of movement? Can't tell, Javi answered. Thermal's useless down here, ambient temp is too weird, lots of cold spots and heat signatures from sludge, but the basic visual shows, shapes shifting, could be debris in flowing water, or not. The low thrumming intensified slightly, a deep bass note vibrating through the metal rungs. Frank gripped his spanner tighter, wedged into his belt. Keep going, slowly. They descended further, the shaft widening slightly. Frank's light began to pick out details below. A graded metal platform, rusted and precarious, spanned part of the shaft about 20 feet down. Below it, the shaft seemed to open into a much larger space. Large diameter pipes coated in filth intersected the darkness. And water, dark, sluggish water pooled below, its surface disturbingly still. Platform ahead, Frank announced. Looks like the end of the ladder. Javi, check it out. Javi maneuvered the drone down past Frank, its light playing over the metal grate. Looks mostly intact, he reported. Lots of corrosion, especially near the edges. There's a narrow walkway leading off it towards, well, more darkness. Frank reached the platform first. He stepped onto the grating cautiously, testing its integrity. It groaned ominously under his weight but held. He swept his light around. They were at the edge of a vast, cavernous space. The ceiling was lost in oppressive darkness far above. Massive concrete pillars, stained and crumbling, rose from the murky water that covered most of the floor area. A network of narrow, corroded metal walkways crisscrossed the space, connecting pillars and leading towards unseen destinations. Huge pipes, some leaking dark fluids, ran along the walls and overhead. The air was thick with the stench of sewage, chemicals, and the ever-present metallic organic tang. This was the factory. Underbelly, the place where waste, both chemical and experimental, had been flushed and forgotten. "Welcome to waste processing," Frank said grimly, helping Alina onto the platform. She stumbled, catching herself, her eyes wide as she took in the scale of the subterranean nightmare. Marcus scrambled down last, practically collapsing onto the grating, breathing heavily. Sal stepped onto the platform with quiet solidity, immediately scanning the darkness around them, his gaze sharp and assessing. "Which way now?" Alina asked, pulling out her official blueprints, though they seemed woefully inadequate for navigating this hazardous environment. Frank consulted Finch's map again. "Map shows we need to cross this swamp towards that central pillar complex." He pointed his flashlight beam across the dark water toward a cluster of thicker pillars in the distance, barely visible. "The heart chamber access should be somewhere near there. Looks like we follow this walkway." He indicated the narrow metal path leading off the platform. It stretched precariously over the black, stagnant water, disappearing into the gloom. "Walkway looks ready to give way any second," Marcus protested, eyeing the rusted metal path with undisguised horror. "Got a better idea," Frank retorted. "Swimming doesn't look appealing." He shone his light down into the water. It was opaque, greasy. Something broke the surface briefly, a bubble of gas or something else, before subsiding, leaving oily ripples. "Drone first," Javi suggested, already piloting the small machine along the proposed path. Its light bobbed ahead. "Walkway seems clear for the first 50 feet at least. No obvious breaks. Stick single file. Watch every step. Don't touch the handrails unless you have to, they look rusted through," Frank instructed. He took the lead again, stepping onto the narrow walkway. It shuddered under his weight, metallic groans echoing in the cavern. Alina followed, keeping her eyes fixed on Frank's boots and the narrow strip of rusted metal ahead. Marcus came next, shuffling cautiously, his hands hovering near the corroded handrails but not touching them. Javi walked backward, keeping the drone flying just ahead of Frank, his eyes darting between the screen and the path. Sal took the rear, his flashlight beam sweeping behind them and across the dark water on either side. They moved slowly, the only sounds the creak and groan of the walkway, the drip of water from unseen pipes above, and their own tense breathing. The low thrumming persisted, a constant pressure in the air. The drone's light illuminated patches of the water below, drifts of pale, sludge-like material floated just beneath the surface in places. Unidentifiable shapes snagged on submerged debris. Suddenly Javi stopped. "Whoa, hold up." Frank froze mid-step. "What is it?" "Drone picking up something. On the walkway ahead, didn't see it before." Javi manipulated the controls, bringing the drone closer, its light focused. "Looks like cables." Frank squinted, then raised his own powerful beam. Lying across the walkway about 15 feet ahead, looking like discarded industrial debris, were several thick black cables, partially submerged in grime and puddles. They hadn't been visible until the drone got closer. They seemed to emerge from conduits running along the underside of the walkway and loop across the path before disappearing back underneath. "Just old wiring," Marcus said dismissively, eager to keep moving. "Step over it." "No," Sal said quietly from the back. His voice, though soft, cut through the tension. "Look closer." Frank held his beam steady. The cables weren't uniform black rubber. Patches seemed almost fibrous, and where one dipped into a puddle of stagnant water, the surface seemed to pulse faintly around it with tiny, almost invisible tendrils extending into the muck. One of the cables twitched, a slow, sinuous movement like a snake shifting its position. Cable constrictors, not just debris. Part of the factory's immune system, integrated even down here. "Okay," Frank breathed. "New plan, we don't touch those." He scanned the area. "Can we go around?" Elena consulted her plans, comparing them with the visible structure. "This walkway seems to be the only direct route on this level towards that central pillar. The schematics don't show any parallel paths nearby." "What about going under?" Javi suggested, pointing the drone's camera beneath the walkway near the cables. "Looks like some support beams. Might be able to climb across underneath." Frank shone his light down. Thick, rusted support struts crisscrossed beneath the walkway grating. It looked incredibly risky, requiring them to hang over the black water. Too dangerous. One slip. Click, click, click. The sound returned, sharp and close. Not ambient this time. It came from directly ahead, from the cluster of cables lying across their path. One of the cables lifted slightly, like a head tasting the air, revealing an underside that glistened wetly, embedded with what looked like shards of porcelain or glass. "They know we're here," Elena whispered. "We need to distract them or disable them," Frank decided quickly. He looked around. His light fell on a heavy valve assembly on a nearby pipe running parallel to the walkway about 10 feet away. A thick crust of rust covered it. "Sal, think you can get that valve open? Might cause a pressure change, steam leak, something to make them recoil." Sal nodded curtly. He carefully backtracked a few steps, then gauged the distance. It required leaning precariously over the dark water, gripping the corroded handrail for balance while reaching for the valve wheel. He took the heavy wrench from his belt. "Be careful," Elena urged. Sal ignored her, focusing on the task. He braced himself, leaned out, and fitted the wrench onto the large valve wheel. He strained, putting his weight into it. The metal groaned in protest. Rust flaked off into the water below. Nothing happened. He repositioned the wrench, found a better angle, and heaved again. With a sudden, ear-splitting screech, the valve wheel turned. A gout of freezing, foul-smelling vapor erupted from a cracked seal nearby, blasting towards the walkway. Simultaneously, a section of the corroded handrail Sal was gripping tore free with a sharp crack of rusted metal. Sal yelled, losing his balance, arms flailing. He pitched sideways off the walkway towards the black water below. Frank reacted instantly, lunging forward, dropping his flashlight, which clattered onto the grating beam, pointing erratically. He grabbed Sal's outstretched arm just as the older man hit the water with a heavy splash. The cold shocked the air from Sal's lungs. Frank strained, his boots slipping on the slick grating, holding Sal's dead weight. "Help me," Frank grunted, muscles screaming. Elena rushed forward, grabbing Frank's belt to anchor him. Marcus, after a moment of panicked indecision, grabbed Sal's other arm. Javi hovered the drone helplessly, its light illuminating the struggle. The cables on the walkway ahead reacted instantly to the commotion and the burst of vapor. They whipped violently, lashing out like enraged pythons. One thick cable slammed down onto the walkway where Frank and the others strained, metal screeching against metal. Another whipped towards the water where Sal struggled. They hauled Sal, gasping and sputtering, back onto the walkway. He was soaked in the vile water, shivering violently, but seemed otherwise unharmed. Just as they pulled him clear, the lashing cable struck the water where he had been, sending up a spray of black liquid. The vapor cloud from the broken valve seal partially obscured the cables, hissing and swirling. The cables seemed disoriented, whipping back and forth but not advancing further down the walkway towards them for the moment. "Move now while they're confused," Frank yelled, retrieving his flashlight. He pushed Sal forward. "Can you walk?" Sal nodded grimly, teeth chattering, pushing wet hair from his eyes. He started moving, quickly but carefully, past the obscured, thrashing cables. Frank, Elena, Javi, and Marcus scrambled after him. They hurried past the danger zone, the hissing vapor stinging their eyes, the sound of the cables whipping nearby terrifyingly close. They reached the other side, collapsing onto the grating, hearts pounding. Looking back, they saw the vapor thinning. The cables were becoming still again, lying inert across the path as if nothing had happened, though the disturbed water around them still rippled. "Everyone okay?" Frank asked, his voice hoarse, taking a quick head count. Sal was soaked and shivering but functional. Marcus looked ready to collapse from sheer terror. Elena seemed shaken but resolute. Javi was still filming, though his hands trembled. "Never doing that again," Marcus panted, sinking to sit on the grating, ignoring the filth. "We're not out yet," Frank reminded him, pushing him back to his feet. "Keep moving. We need to find that control access." They continued along the walkway, the structure groaning underfoot. The central pillar complex loomed closer now, a dense knot of massive concrete supports disappearing into the darkness above and descending into the sludge below. Walkways branched off in multiple directions here, creating a confusing maze over the water. Finch's map indicated a specific route, leading towards the base of the largest pillar. As they approached, the low thrumming intensified, becoming a palpable vibration in the metal beneath their feet and in the air around them. The rhythmic click, click, click sound also returned, louder here, seeming to emanate from the pillar complex itself. Javi aimed the drone towards the base of the main pillar. "Getting weird readings here, strong energy fluctuations, and the thermal signature. It's big, diffuse, but covering the whole lower section of these pillars." Frank shone his light downwards near the pillar base. The water here was thicker, sludgier, and it wasn't stagnant. It seemed to pulse, slowly, rhythmically, in time with the thrumming vibration. Pale shapes moved within the sludge, not distinct creatures, but shifting masses, like coagulating fat mixed with mechanical debris. "The heart," Elena breathed, recognizing the description from Finch's notes about the baseline organic matrix. It's not just in the chamber, it's spreading. According to Finch's map, the access point to the control system wasn't in the chamber itself, but in a small maintenance junction built into the side of the main pillar, just above the pulsating sludge line. Frank directed his beam towards the spot indicated. A small, rusted metal door, barely visible against the stained concrete, was set into the pillar's side. "There," Frank said, "that has to be it." The walkway led directly to a small platform at the base of the pillar, right beside the maintenance door. But the last 10 feet of the walkway looked different. The metal grating was warped, twisted upwards in places, and it was coated in a thick, rubbery, grayish substance that seemed to have flowed out from the pillar itself, adhering the walkway to the concrete. It looked organic, yet unnaturally tough, like hardened resin mixed with scar tissue. Wall flesh. Growing, spreading, reinforcing. "What is that stuff?" Marcus asked nervously, pointing at the gray coating. "Part of the factories. Modification," Alina guessed, her voice grim. "Finch wrote about the matrix reinforcing weak points, integrating itself." "Can we get across it?" Frank shone his light on the gray substance. It glistened wetly in places. It seemed solid enough, but touching it felt like a terrible idea. Javi sent the drone hovering low over the gray patch. "Doesn't look like it's moving, but the texture's weird, almost looks like skin stretched over metal." Click thump, click thump. A new sound joined the chorus. A heavy, rhythmic beat, like a monstrous, slow heartbeat coming from within the pillar itself. The entire structure seemed to vibrate with it. "We have to try," Frank decided. "That door is our only shot." He stepped cautiously onto the edge of the gray substance. It felt strangely yielding under his boot, like hard rubber. He took another step. It held his weight. "Okay, move carefully, don't slip." He edged across the wall flesh coating toward the maintenance door. Alina followed, then Javi, then Marcus. Sal came last, his wet clothes dripping onto the strange surface, leaving dark spots that seemed to be slowly absorbed. They reached the small platform before the rusted door. It was barely large enough for the 5 of them. The heavy click-thump was much louder here, vibrating through the concrete pillar into their bones. The air tasted metallic. The door was old, secured by a simple, rusted latch mechanism, not the heavy lock seen above. Hope surged briefly. Frank reached for the latch. As his fingers brushed the cold metal, the section of concrete wall directly beside the door bulged outwards. The smooth, stained surface cracked, splitting open like a wound. Pale, fibrous tendrils glistening with foul fluid pushed through the crack, followed by something hard and segmented like chitin mixed with ceramic. More tendrils emerged, whipping blindly in the air, searching. Simultaneously, the wall flesh beneath their feet rippled. Sections of it humped upwards, trying to grasp their ankles. Marcus screamed, stumbling backwards, almost falling off the narrow platform into the poolsing sludge below. Sal grabbed him, steadying him. From the crack in the pillar, more of the thing emerged, not a limb, but some kind of organic tool. A fused mess of biomechanical components ending in sharp, rotating blades made of porcelain shards and surgical steel, whirring menacingly. It swung towards Frank's head. Chapter 5: The Junction Box. The whirring blades, a grotesque fusion of porcelain shards and surgical steel, sliced through the air where Frank's head had been a split second before. He threw himself sideways, slamming hard against the curved concrete of the pillar, the impact jarring his teeth. The biomechanical tool retracted momentarily into the cracked wall, then thrust out again with terrifying speed, sweeping across the narrow platform. "Get down!" Frank yelled, scrambling away from the wall. Simultaneously, the gray wall flesh underfoot pulsed violently. Thick, rubbery pseudopods snaked upwards, grabbing at Marcus's legs again. He shrieked, windmilling his arms as Sal shoved him forward, breaking the hold. Sal swung the heavy wrench downwards in a brutal arc, smashing it into the grasping tendril of bioconcrete. It recoiled with a wet, tearing sound, leaving a dent in the strange material, which immediately began to ooze a thick, clear fluid. Javi stumbled back, instinctively raising his phone, the drone hovering erratically above the chaos, its light catching the glinting blades and the glistening tendrils emerging from the wall. Elena pressed herself flat against the pillar beside Frank, eyes wide with horror, trying to make sense of the assault. The whirring tool retracted again, then plunged toward Sal, who was momentarily off balance after striking the wall flesh. Frank lunged, grabbing the rusted maintenance door latch not to open it, but for leverage. He kicked out sideways, catching the base of the biomechanical arm just as it emerged from the wall. His heavy boot connected with a sickening crunch of ceramic and something softer, organic. The tool spasmed, blades spinning wildly, and retracted fully into the crack with a screech of tortured mechanisms. Fibrous tendrils writhed in the opening for a moment before pulling back, the crack narrowing slightly, though not closing completely. A foul, ammonia-like stench puffed from the opening. "The floor!" Elena shouted, pointing. More sections of the wall flesh were humping upwards, forming grasping claws and tendrils, trying to ensnare their feet. Sal stomped hard on one, his boot sinking slightly into the yielding surface before it recoiled. "The door, get it open!" Frank yelled, finally yanking hard on the rusted latch. It resisted, fused by corrosion and time. He braced his foot against the pillar and pulled with all his strength. Metal screeched. Sal joined him, adding his weight. The latch groaned, bent, then snapped upwards with a sharp crack. The small metal door swung inward about a foot, revealing utter blackness and releasing a wave of concentrated stench, decay, ozone, and hot metal. The heavy click-thump sound was significantly louder from within, a physical pressure against their eardrums. "Inside now," Frank ordered, holding the door. Elena scrambled through the opening immediately, disappearing into the dark. Marcus hesitated, eyes darting between the writhing floor and the black maw of the doorway. "What's in there?" "Doesn't matter, move." Sal shoved him bodily through the opening. Marcus yelped as he tumbled inside. Javi quickly piloted the drone through the doorway, then scrambled after it. Frank took one last look at the platform. The wall flesh was still writhing, but the crack in the pillar remained quiescent for the moment, then ducked inside. Sal entered last, pulling the heavy door shut behind them. It closed with a dull, solid thud, the broken latch hanging uselessly. They were enveloped in immediate, suffocating darkness and the deafening click-thump of the factory's grotesque heart. "Light!" Frank gasped, fumbling for his flashlight, which had thankfully remained clipped to his belt during the scuffle. The beam sprang to life, cutting through the oppressive black. They were in a cramped, cylindrical space, perhaps 10 feet across, a maintenance junction built into the pillar's core. Walls curved inwards, covered not in concrete but in overlapping plates of rusted metal bolted together. Thick bundles of wires, coated in dust and grime, snaked across the ceiling and walls like metallic ivy, some bundled neatly, others hanging loose, ends sparking faintly. Pipes of varying sizes pierced the walls at odd angles, some dripping viscous fluids onto the grated metal floor. The air was hot, humid, and tasted metallic, vibrating with the relentless click-thump that seemed to originate from directly below their feet. Javi's drone added its light, hovering near the ceiling, revealing more details. Control panels, archaic and damaged, were bolted haphazardly to the curved walls, their screens dark or cracked, gauges frozen or shattered. Levers were rusted in place. But dominating the center of the small space was something else entirely. It looked like a grotesque, metallic tree trunk rising from the grated floor and disappearing through an opening in the ceiling. Thick cables and pipes formed the trunk, bound together with rusted clamps, and disturbingly, wrapped in swathes of the same gray, rubbery wall-flesh material they'd encountered outside. This central structure pulsed faintly with the deep click-thump rhythm, and the air around it shimmered with heat. Smaller wires and conduits snaked out from it, connecting to the damaged wall panels like metallic roots and branches. Some wires terminated in sparking, frayed ends. Others plugged into bizarre junctions incorporating glass vials filled with murky fluid or what looked disturbingly like preserved organic components, nodules of tissue, sections of bone, even cloudy eyeballs, integrated directly into the machinery. "What is this place?" Marcus whispered, backing against the curved wall near the door, wiping sweat and grime from his face. "Finch, control," Alina breathed, her gaze fixed on the pulsating central structure. She approached it cautiously, shining her own smaller flashlight beam onto its surface. This must be the primary nexus he mentioned in the logs, where he tried to integrate the factory systems with the organic matrix. She pointed to a cracked monitor screen embedded in the structure, half overgrown with the gray biomatter. He wasn't just controlling the factory, he was trying to merge with it. Frank scanned the cramped space. No other exits were visible, just the door they'd entered through and the hole in the ceiling where the pulsating structure ascended. He tried the door handle, it didn't budge. Sealed tight, whether from the outside or by some internal mechanism he couldn't tell. "We're locked in again." Sal, shivering noticeably now despite the heat, ran a hand over the metal wall near the door. His wet clothes clung to him, and his face looked unnaturally pale in the combined lights. "Solid," he pronounced, his teeth chattering slightly. "No other way out down here." The click-thump seemed to intensify, the vibration shaking the grated floor beneath them. A shower of sparks erupted from a bundle of frayed wires overhead. Javi flinched, adjusting the drone's position. "Can we use this?" Marcus asked, pointing a shaking finger at the central structure. Use it to override the locks. Open the fire escape Alina mentioned. Alina examined the structure more closely, tracing wires, peering at damaged interfaces. It's a mess, part machine, part organism. Finch's logs mentioned feedback loops, system conflicts. He might have lost control of it long before the factory shut down. She wiped grime off a small metal plate near the base. Etched into it were the words, Project Chimera Central Core Nexus Biointerface Active. Below that, a series of status lights, all dark except one dimly flickering amber light labeled Manual Override Input. Beside it was a small, covered port. Manual Override, Frank seized on the words. What does it need? A key, a code. Alina carefully lifted the hinged cover over the port. It wasn't a keyhole or a data port. It was a recessed compartment containing a cluster of fine, sharp, metallic needles, stained dark brown, pointing inwards. Below them was a small reservoir coated in dried residue. "Oh God," she whispered, recoiling slightly. "It's a biointerface. It needs a biological sample. Blood, maybe tissue." "Blood," Marcus paled further. "Whose blood?" "Finch, presumably," Alina said. "Or compatible genetic material he wrote about, integrating himself. This was likely his direct interface." Frank stared at the needles, then back at the sealed door. Trapped between a monstrous factory and a blood-powered control system. Any other options? Alina scanned the damaged panels lining the walls. Most of these seemed disconnected or fried. This central nexus appears to be the only thing remotely functional, if you can call it that. The click-thump faltered for a beat, then resumed, slightly faster now. A low, guttural groaning sound echoed down from the shaft above where the nexus ascended. "Something happening," Javi said nervously, pointing the drone's light upwards. "That sound." Sal coughed, a deep, racking sound that shook his frame. He leaned heavily against the wall, shivering more intensely. "Cold," he muttered, rubbing his arms. The foul water he'd been submerged in seemed to be taking its toll. Frank looked at Sal with concern, then back at the biointerface. Desperation clawed at him. They were trapped, hunted, and one of his crew was deteriorating. He thought of Finch's office, the blood-stained chair, the diary speaking of merging. "Compatible genetic material," he repeated Alina's words. He looked at Marcus Thorne, the developer whose ambition had brought them here. Then he looked at his own hand. A long shot, a disgusting, horrifying shot, but maybe their only one. "Give me your knife, Sal," Frank requested quietly. Sal looked at him, understanding dawning in his eyes. He reached into his boot, his movements slow, clumsy from the cold, and produced a sturdy utility knife. He handed it to Frank without a word. "What are you doing?" Marcus asked, alarmed. Frank ignored him. He took a deep breath, held his left hand over the reservoir beneath the needles, and hesitated only for a second before drawing the sharp blade swiftly across his palm. Blood welled instantly, dark in the flashlight beams. He clenched his fist, letting the blood drip into the small reservoir. As the first drops hit the dried residue, the dim amber light above the port flashed brightly, then turned a steady, sickly green. The central nexus structure shuddered violently. The click-thump sped up dramatically, becoming a frantic, pounding rhythm. Lights flickered wildly on the damaged wall panels. A high-pitched whine started up, piercing their ears. The cracked monitor screen embedded in the Nexus flared to life, displaying not data but a swirling, chaotic kaleidoscope of images. Fleeting glimpses of the factory interior, distorted anatomical diagrams, faces contorted in agony, Finch's face, younger, intense, then older, desperate, superimposed over wiring diagrams, flashes of scuttling limbs, pulsing tissue, and always returning again and again. A central, pulsating mass of darkness, the amalgam heart. "It's active," Alina exclaimed, shielding her eyes from the flashing screen. "Can you control it?" Frank urged, clutching his bleeding hand. Alina frantically examined the few responsive-looking buttons and dials near the now-glowing interface port. Most were unmarked or labeled with cryptic symbols Finch had used. "I don't know. It's not standard system architecture. It's alive. It's reacting to your blood, Frank, but I don't know how to direct it." She tentatively pressed a large, grimy button labeled System Purge. The frantic pounding of the Nexus instantly stopped. The flashing monitor went dark. The high-pitched whine died. Silence fell, absolute and terrifying, broken only by Sal's ragged breathing. Even the low background thrumming ceased. For a moment, they felt a wave of disorienting vertigo, as if the entire factory had just held its breath. Did it work?" Marcus asked hopefully into the silence. Then a low, wet, gurgling sound began, emanating from the central Nexus structure itself. The gray wall flesh covering it began to pulse, not rhythmically, but erratically, like diseased muscle tissue. A seam split open near the base, oozing thick, yellowish fluid that smelled horrifically like infection and formaldehyde. The cracked monitor flickered back on, not with the chaotic images but with a single, clear image, a live feed from somewhere else in the factory. It showed the main assembly hall, viewed from high on the catwalks. Below, bathed in the harsh glare of the remaining work light left near the entrance, stood a figure, or rather, a horrifying assembly of figures. It was a grotesque parody of a human form, cobbled together from disparate parts. A torso made of fused mannequin pieces and sheet metal scraps. One arm a rusty hydraulic piston ending in clamp-like fingers. The other, a disturbingly lifelike porcelain limb clutching a hammer. Legs formed from mismatched metal struts and prosthetic legs. Wires snaked across its body, sparking intermittently. Tools, wrenches, saws, drills were embedded haphazardly into its structure. And atop its shoulders, where a head should be, was a crudely welded cage of rebar containing a swirling mass of something. It looked like organic sludge, ropes of tissue, and integrated components. Wires, lenses, metal shards constantly shifting and reforming. A tool golem, but worse. Animated scrap held together by the factory's malevolent will. It stood motionless directly beneath the catwalk camera feed shown on the monitor, as if waiting. "What is that thing?" Javi breathed, aiming his phone at the monitor screen. Before anyone could answer, Sal gasped, clutching his chest. He doubled over, coughing violently, a thick, dark fluid spattering the grated floor. It wasn't just water he was coughing up. It looked like the same oily, black sludge they'd seen in the water outside. "Sal!" Frank rushed to his side, grabbing his arm. Sal's skin felt clammy, unnaturally cold despite the junction's heat. His eyes rolled back slightly. Alina knelt beside him. He's burning up and freezing at the same time. That water. Finch's notes mentioned biocontaminants, accelerated cellular breakdown, integration attempts. As she spoke, Sal's hand gripping Frank's arm tightened with unnatural strength. Frank tried to pull away but couldn't. He looked down. Where Sal's wet sleeve was torn, the skin underneath looked wrong. It was pale, grayish, and seemed almost metallic, reflecting the light unnaturally. Fine, dark filaments like embedded wires were visible just beneath the surface. The sludge he'd coughed up on the floor began to steam slightly, tiny tendrils extending from it, probing the air. The monitor screen flickered, the image shifting from the tool golem to show the corridor outside their sealed junction box. The crack in the pillar wall gaped wider now. More biomechanical limbs and tools probed outwards. The wall flesh on the platform writhed, thickening, spreading. Then the screen changed again, showing a close-up. A single, unblinking prosthetic eye, glass reflecting the light, embedded directly into the poolsing gray matter of the central nexus structure right in front of them. It swiveled slowly, fixing its gaze directly on Frank. A voice echoed in the small space, seeming to come from the nexus itself, from the walls, from inside their own heads. It was distorted, layered, a mechanical rasp overlaying a wet, organic whisper, Finch's voice, perhaps corrupted and merged with the machine. Welcome, integrator. The heart requires connection. The green light above the biointerface port began to pulse again, faster and faster. The needles vibrated, stained with Frank's blood. The nexus throbbed, the gurgling sound intensifying. Sal groaned, his body convulsing, his grip on Frank's arm becoming crushingly tight. The factory wasn't just fighting them, it was trying to absorb them. Chapter 6: Symbiotic Decay. The voice wasn't just heard, it burrowed. A composite horror of Finch's corrupted intellect layered over the wet rasp of failing biology and the grating static of damaged machinery. It echoed not off the rusted metal walls of the junction box, but within the cavities of their skulls. Welcome, integrator. The heart requires connection. Frank recoiled instinctively, yanking his arm, but Sal's grip was iron. Not just strong, impossibly, inhumanly strong. He looked down in horror. The gray metallic sheen on Sal's skin seemed to spread even as he watched, crawling up his forearm like aggressive mold, extinguishing the natural pigment. The fine, dark filaments beneath the surface pulsed faintly, in time with the frantic click-thump of the central nexus. Sal's knuckles were white, his grip crushing Frank's wrist, the pressure immense. Sal's head lolled back against the wall, eyes rolling, teeth clenched in a silent rictus of agony. A low, guttural moan escaped his lips, morphing into a wet, mechanical clicking sound deep in his throat. "Sal, snap out of it," Frank shouted, more out of desperation than hope. He tried prying the fingers loose, but they wouldn't budge. They felt cold, hard, like metal clamps fused with rigid cartilage. "He can't hear you," Alina yelled over the pounding rhythm of the nexus. She was frantically examining the biointerface port where Frank had bled, then tracing wires leading from it with her flashlight, comparing them to Finch's diagrams in the diary pages spread hastily on a less grimy section of the floor grating. The infection. It's creating a parasitic biocircuit. He's being directly controlled or integrated by the nexus, through the contaminants in the water. Marcus scrambled backwards until he hit the curved wall beside the sealed door, sliding down into a crouch, hands covering his ears as if to block out the invasive voice. "Make it stop! Make it stop!" he whimpered, eyes squeezed shut. Javi, despite his trembling hands, kept his phone camera aimed, switching focus between Sal's horrifying transformation and the pulsing Nexus core. The drone hovered near the ceiling, its rotors battling the increasingly hot, turbulent air, its light catching the single prosthetic eye embedded in the Nexus as it remained fixed unwaveringly on Frank. "Connection required," the voice insisted, lower now, more guttural. "Flesh, interfaces, bridge the gap, B1." Sal's body convulsed again, a violent shudder that rattled his teeth. His head snapped forward, eyes open now but filmed over, pupils dilated to black voids. He wasn't seeing them. He turned his head slowly, mechanically, towards the central nexus structure. His grip on Frank's arm tightened further, pulling Frank irresistibly towards the core. "No," Frank grunted, digging his heels into the grating, straining against the unnatural strength. "Elena, do something." "I'm trying," Elena shouted back, desperation in her voice. She pointed at a cluster of wires near the biointerface. "This seems to regulate the organic signal input. If I can disconnect it, maybe it'll break the link to Sal." She reached for the thickest cable, which sparked erratically where it entered a junction box crusted with biomatter. "Don't," Frank warned. "You saw what happened when you hit purge. Randomly pulling wires might make it worse." The monitor embedded in the Nexus flickered again, showing the tool golem in the assembly hall. It hadn't moved, but dozens of smaller shapes, scuttling limbs, were now swarming around its feet, clattering against the concrete, beginning to climb its mismatched legs like metallic insects. Then the view switched back to the corridor outside their junction box. The crack in the pillar was definitely wider. A multi-jointed limb, tipped with what looked like a surgical drill, snaked out, tapping against the exterior of their sealed door. Testing. Probing. Sal groaned, a sound mixed with the grind of stressed metal, and took a shuffling step towards the Nexus, dragging Frank with him. Frank could feel the heat radiating from the core structure, smell the ozone and decay intensifying. He looked down again at Sal's arm, at the creeping gray transformation. Where the wet fabric of Sal's shirt tore near the shoulder, Frank saw not just discolored skin, but metal plates, seamlessly fused with flesh and bone, glistening with dark fluid. Small wires snaked across the plates, disappearing into Sal's body. He wasn't just infected, he was being actively rebuilt from the inside out. "The knife!" Frank yelled, nodding towards the utility knife Sal had given him, now lying on the grating near Elena. "Cut his arm, cut him loose." Elena looked horrified. "Frank, I can't." "We don't have a choice." Frank strained against Sal's pull, which was becoming relentless. "He's pulling me into that thing. Cut him free." Marcus whimpered louder from his corner. Javi lowered his phone slightly, torn between documenting and intervening. Elena hesitated for only a second more, then snatched up the knife. Her hands shook. She looked at Sal's face, vacant and tormented, then at the monstrously strong, transforming arm gripping Frank. She took a ragged breath and moved towards them. Before she could act, Sal's body went rigid. The clicking in his throat intensified, becoming a rapid-fire mechanical staccato. His head snapped back, mouth opening impossibly wide, emitting not a scream, but a burst of high-frequency sound, like tortured metal scraping metal, that pierced their ears and made the drone wobble violently in the air. Simultaneously, the gray, metallic infection on his skin flared, suddenly covering his entire visible arm and spreading rapidly up his neck and onto his face. His grip on Frank, instead of loosening, changed. The cold hardness remained, but the flesh beneath Frank's fingers seemed to flow, reshaping itself, fusing Sal's hand to Frank's wrist with bands of the rubbery, gray wall flesh material. It oozed from Sal's skin, hardening rapidly, creating a living manacle. Frank cried out, pulling back in revulsion and pain as the warm, rapidly solidifying biomatter clamped around his wrist. "He's fusing to me." Elena stopped short, the knife useless now. Cutting Sal's arm wouldn't free Frank. They were becoming physically joined. The nexus pulsed harder. The voice came again, louder, triumphant. Integration, proceeding, the vessel accepts the graft. The single prosthetic eye swiveled, fixing its gaze now on the bond forming between Frank and Sal. The green light above the biointerface port pulsed in sync with the nexus's throbbing heartbeat. "No," Elena reacted instinctively, driven by desperation. She ignored the sparking wires she'd considered before and instead slammed her fist down hard on the biointerface port itself, the covered compartment with the needles stained by Frank's blood. She hit it again and again, ignoring the sharp pain in her hand. "Stop it! Leave him alone!" For a moment nothing happened. Then, with a crack, the hinged cover of the port shattered under her assault. The needles inside snapped. The steady green light flickered violently, turned red, then died completely. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The frantic click-thump rhythm of the nexus abruptly stuttered, faltered, then dissolved into a chaotic, arrhythmic series of spasms. The structure shuddered violently, shaking the entire junction box. Pipes overhead bucked, spraying steam and foul liquids. Wires whipped loose, showering sparks. The monitor screen went black. The invasive voice cut off mid-word, replaced by a deafening blast of white noise static that overwhelmed their senses before dying into an echoing silence, punctuated only by the drip of fluids and the crackle of shorting circuits. Sal's body arched backwards, propelled by an unseen force pulling Frank with him. He slammed against the pulsing nexus core. Sal let out a true scream this time, agonized and human before it was choked off. His grip, fused to Frank's wrist, spasmed, the wall-flesh bond stretching taut. The gray metallic infection covering Sal seemed to boil, blistering and cracking. Thick, black smoke, smelling of burning flesh and overheated wiring, poured from the contact point where Sal's back hit the nexus. Frank yelled, struggling against the bond, trying to pull Sal away from the violently spasming core. The heat was intense. He could feel the sickening vibration traveling up Sal's arm into his own. Then, as suddenly as it began, the nexus's violent spasm ceased. The structure went still, silent. No pulsing, no thrumming, no lights. Only the residual heat, the dripping fluids, and the stench of burnt wiring and flesh remained. Sal slumped forward, his dead weight pulling heavily on Frank's fused wrist. His eyes were closed, his face slack, the metallic sheen dulled, cracked like burnt pottery. The rapid clicking in his throat had stopped. He was unnervingly still. The black smoke slowly dissipated. Sal, Frank shook his arm gently, ignoring the grotesque fusion. Sal, you with me? No response. Frank felt for a pulse at Sal's neck, his fingers pressing against cold, unresponsive flesh overlaying something hard and unyielding. Nothing. Is he? Marcus asked timidly from his corner, peering through his fingers. Elena approached cautiously, shining her light on Sal's face, then on the horrific burn marks on his back where he'd contacted the nexus. She checked his eyes, felt his neck. She looked at Frank, her expression grim. He's gone, Frank, whatever that surge did. It fried him and whatever was controlling him. She touched the wall-flesh bond still connecting Sal's hand to Frank's wrist. It felt cool now, hard and brittle like old resin. But it didn't break the connection. Frank stared down at Sal's lifeless body, slumped against him, still physically joined to him by the grotesque biomaterial. Grief, horror, and a chilling sense of violation washed over him. He'd led his crew into this nightmare. He'd used his blood to activate the machine that ultimately killed one of them. He took a shuddering breath, pushing the emotions down. Survival first. The knife, Frank said, his voice hoarse. He nodded towards Elena. We need to cut this crap off now. Elena picked up the knife again, her hand steadier this time. She carefully examined the hardened gray bond. It looks brittle now. Maybe I can chip it away. She began carefully sawing and picking at the edges of the wall-flesh material where it fused Sal's cold hand to Frank's wrist. It was tough, but small fragments started to flake off. Javi brought the drone closer, adding its light to the delicate operation. Anything happening outside? Frank asked, glancing nervously at the sealed door. The drilling sound had stopped when the nexus died. Javi checked his phone, which still displayed the last image captured by the drone before he'd entered the shaft, the assembly hall floor. He shook his head. Drone's internal now, no external view, and the monitor on that thing is dead. He gestured at the silent nexus. As Elena worked carefully, chipping away at the hardened resin, Frank examined their prison. The junction box seemed stable now, the immediate threat from the nexus apparently neutralized. But they were still locked in. Sal's body was a grim burden, and the unknown waited outside. Okay, Elena announced after several minutes of tense work. She had managed to sever most of the connection, carefully cutting around Frank's skin. Just this last bit. Careful. With a final crack, the hardened material broke. Sal's hand fell away, leaving Frank's wrist raw, bleeding slightly and marked by the disgusting resin, but free. Sal's body slumped fully to the grated floor with a heavy thud. Frank rubbed his wrist, flexing his fingers, relief mixing with revulsion. He looked down at Sal's body. We can't just leave him here. We might not have a choice, Frank, Elena said gently. We need to find a way out. Frank nodded grimly. He took Sal's heavy wrench from the man's belt, hefting its familiar weight. A poor substitute for the man himself, but a necessary tool. He looked around the junction again. That hole in the ceiling, where the nexus goes up, is that a way out? Javi piloted the drone upwards, shining its light into the opening. It looks like another shaft, Frank. Can't see how far it goes. The nexus structure fills most of it. What about the door? Marcus asked, finally getting to his feet, though he still looked terrified. Is it still blocked? Frank approached the door they'd entered through and pushed against it. It didn't budge. Still sealed, or locked internally now. He examined the metal plates of the wall again. This whole thing is built inside the pillar. What if we can cut through? Elena shone her light on the rusted bolts holding the metal plates to the unseen structure beneath. Maybe, if we had heavy cutting gear, all we have is Sal's knife and a wrench. She paused, looking at the dead nexus. When the power surged, maybe it unlocked something else, a maintenance hatch Finch used. She began examining the base of the nexus and the surrounding floor grating more closely. Frank joined her search, sweeping his light methodically over the floor and lower walls. Javi used the drone to get closer looks at inaccessible areas. Marcus stayed near the door, uselessly fiddling with the broken latch. "Wait," Elena said suddenly. She directed her light at a section of the grated floor near the base of the nexus, partially hidden by dangling cables. This section looks different. The mesh pattern is slightly off. She knelt down, probing the edge with the tip of the knife. It lifted slightly. It's a hatch. Frank helped her lift it. The square section of grating came up on stiff hinges, revealing another dark opening below. This wasn't a deep shaft, but a narrow crawl space extending horizontally beneath the junction floor, filled with pipes and wiring. A blast of cool, damp air, smelling of wet earth and mildew rather than chemicals, flowed up. "Where does it go?" Frank asked, shining his light into the crawl space. It seemed to extend only 10 or 15 feet before turning sharply. Elena quickly consulted her official blueprints, then Finch's crude map, comparing them under the light. This isn't on either plan. She looked closer at the opening. It looks like an old service conduit, maybe predating Finch's major excavations, if it bypasses the main waste processing area. It might lead somewhere safer, Frank finished her thought, or deeper into the foundations. It was a gamble, but it was better than staying locked in with Sal's body and the silent, potentially restarting nexus. "Javi, can the drone fit?" Javi maneuvered the drone towards the opening. "Yeah, just barely, sending it in." The drone dipped into the crawl space, its light disappearing around the first bend. Javi watched the feed intently on his phone. Okay, narrow, lots of pipes. Turning now, opening into, looks like old brickwork. Like foundation tunnels. It's clear for about 30 feet ahead, then another turn. Foundation tunnels, Elena mused. They might connect back to older parts of the factory or even lead outside the main perimeter eventually. It's our best bet. "All right," Frank decided. "We go, Javi, keep the drone ahead, I'll take point. Elena, then Marcus, we can't bring." He looked sadly at Sal's body. He removed Sal's dog tags from around his neck, tucking them securely into his own pocket. "Let's move." Frank swung his legs into the crawl space. It was tight, barely shoulder width. He had to hunch low, the ceiling pressing down, pipes snagging at his clothes. He started crawling forward, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness ahead, following the bobbing light of the drone relayed via Javi's commentary. The air smelled cleaner here, but ancient, undisturbed. Elena followed, the confined space amplifying her claustrophobia. Then came Marcus, whimpering softly as he squeezed into the tight tunnel, complaining about the dirt and the pipes. Javi entered last, holding his phone carefully, piloting the drone ahead while crawling blindly himself. They moved slowly through the cramped conduit, the only sounds their shuffling movements, Marcus's occasional whimpers, and Javi's whispered directions based on the drone feed. After the first turn, the conduit opened slightly into a low, brick-lined tunnel, just high enough to crouch walk. Water dripped steadily from the arched ceiling. The floor was muddy earth. Drone reached the next turn, Javi reported. Still clear beyond it. Wait, picking up something. Air movement feels like a draft. A draft could mean a connection to the outside or another part of the factory. Hope flickered. Keep going, Frank urged. They navigated the second turn. The tunnel continued, seeming older here, the brickwork crumbling in places. The draft was stronger. Frank could feel it on his face now, cool, damp air moving sluggishly. And with it came a sound. Faint, distant, but growing steadily louder as they advanced. It was a rhythmic, heavy scraping sound, metal dragging on stone, accompanied by a wet, tearing noise and intermittent heavy thuds. And beneath it all, a low, multi-toned humming or chattering, like 1,000 broken machines trying to harmonize. Javi swallowed hard, watching his screen. Frank, you need to see this. He held up his phone. The drone had rounded a bend further down the tunnel and was looking into a larger space, some kind of subterranean junction or storage area. What filled the space, illuminated by the drone's spotlight, was horrifying. It was the tool golem from the assembly hall monitor, but it wasn't waiting anymore. It was actively working. It dragged heavy sheets of scrap metal across the floor with its hydraulic arm. Its porcelain hand wielded a massive hammer, smashing concrete debris into smaller pieces. Its drill-tipped limb bored into the brickwork, and the cage on its shoulders, filled with the swirling organic sludge and components, pulsed with faint light, emitting the discordant humming. It seemed to be building something or clearing a path. And it was working its way directly towards the tunnel entrance they were approaching. Chapter 7: Assembly Required. The image on Javi's phone screen froze them in the narrow, dripping tunnel. The tool golem, a nightmarish figure of industrial scrap and biological refuse animated by the factory's corrupted will, wasn't just a passive threat anymore. It was an active agent, its discordant humming and rhythmic destruction echoing closer, reverberating through the damp earth and crumbling brickwork. The scraping of metal on stone, the heavy thud of its hammer blows, the wet tearing sounds, each noise painted a picture of relentless, mindless demolition, clearing a path directly towards them. "Is it coming for us?" Marcus whispered, his voice trembling, eyes glued to the phone screen showing the golem smashing debris near the tunnel mouth. "It's clearing the path or maybe fortifying this section," Elena theorized, her voice low and tense, analyzing the creature's actions. following some directive from the Nexus, even if the main control junction is dead. Residual commands maybe, or maybe the heart itself is guiding it now. Doesn't matter why, Frank stated grimly, his gaze fixed on the tunnel ahead, listening to the approaching cacophony. It's coming this way, we can't go forward. He looked back the way they came, toward the oppressive crawlspace leading back to the dead junction box and Sal's body. And we can't go back. The scraping sound intensified, punctuated by a loud crash as the golem seemingly demolished a section of wall near the tunnel entrance. Dust billowed faintly into the tunnel, carried on the draft. The humming grew louder, a dissonant chorus that grated on the nerves. Other options. Frank directed the question at Alina, shining his light on the tunnel walls around them. Side passages, anything on the plans that might intersect here. Alina quickly consulted her blueprints, though the foundations this deep were poorly documented. There's an old drainage system marked, possibly running parallel to this tunnel, but the access points aren't clear. It could be collapsed. She ran her hand along the damp brickwork beside them. This section feels hollow. She knocked gently. The sound was dull, thick, not solid brick. Frank knocked as well, listening intently. She's right, false wall or just crumbling. He pushed harder against the bricks. Several shifted inward slightly, dislodging mud and revealing darkness behind them. There's a space back here. Working quickly, using the heavy wrench Sal had carried, Frank began prying at the loose bricks. Alina helped, using the knife to scrape out the crumbling mortar. The work was slow, hampered by the cramped space and the growing noise of the approaching golem. Marcus huddled uselessly, watching the tunnel entrance with wide, terrified eyes. Javi kept the drone hovering near the golem, providing updates via the phone screen, while simultaneously trying to help dislodge bricks near the opening they were creating. "It's turning," Javi reported urgently, his voice strained. "Dragging something heavy, looks like a chunk of machinery, positioning it near the tunnel mouth." "Blocking us in," Frank grunted, pulling another brick free. The opening was now large enough to squeeze through. Darkness lay beyond, and the smell of stagnant water and decay was strong. "Or sealing itself off after it comes through," Alina suggested grimly. "Finishing its task here and ensuring nothing follows." A loud grinding sound echoed from the tunnel mouth, followed by a heavy, final thud. "It's blocked the entrance," Javi confirmed, watching the drone feed. "The golem. It's pushing the debris into the tunnel now, sealing it from the other side." They were being buried alive. "Through here, now." Frank shoved Alina towards the opening they made in the side wall. He didn't wait, scrambling after her through the narrow gap, tearing his jacket on a protruding brick. Alina tumbled through the opening, landing awkwardly on a slippery, debris-strewn floor. Frank landed beside her. They were in another tunnel, similar in construction to the one they'd just left, but narrower and half-flooded with several inches of black, stagnant water. Pipes ran along the ceiling, dripping steadily. This must be the old drainage system. "Marcus, Javi, come on," Frank yelled back through the hole. Marcus practically threw himself through the gap, landing with a splash in the filthy water, sputtering. Javi followed, retrieving the drone just before squeezing through the opening himself. He landed beside Marcus, quickly checking the drone for damage. From the other side of the brick wall, they heard the relentless scraping and thudding as the golem continued to fill the main foundation tunnel with debris, inching closer to their makeshift exit, sealing them behind a wall of rubble. "Which way?" Frank shone his light down the flooded drainage tunnel. It stretched into darkness in both directions. The air was heavy, still, the only sound the constant dripping of water. Alina consulted her plans again, trying to orient herself based on the assumed location of the foundation tunnel they'd escaped. If this is the old north drainage line, heading this way, she pointed left, should theoretically lead away from the central factory structure, possibly towards the older perimeter wall. It might even surface near the riverbank bordering the property if it hasn't collapsed. Better than heading back towards the heart of this nightmare, Frank decided. Left it is. Stay alert. Watch your footing in the water. They began wading through the flooded tunnel, the cold, foul water soaking their trousers, swirling around their ankles. The beam of Frank's flashlight cut through the oppressive darkness, reflecting off the wet brickwork and the greasy surface of the water. Javi kept the drone flying low, just above the water level, its light adding a smaller pool of illumination. The silence was a stark contrast to the golem's noisy demolition. Here, only their splashes and the rhythmic dripping disturbed the quiet. It felt ancient, forgotten. Cobwebs thick with age hung like rotten lace from the ceiling pipes. Indeterminate shapes drifted just beneath the water's surface. They moved for what felt like a long time, the tunnel twisting slightly but maintaining its general direction. The water level remained constant, ankle-deep. Marcus stumbled frequently, his fear replaced by weary complaint. Alina periodically checked the brickwork, looking for signs of structural instability. Javi monitored the drone, its battery indicator slowly ticking down. Frank led the way, wrench held ready, eyes scanning the darkness ahead. Suddenly Javi stopped, drone picking up something. Frank halted, raising his flashlight. What now? Movement. Under the water ahead, Javi reported, staring intently at the drone feed displayed on his phone. Not fish, something. Larger and pale. Frank swept his own powerful beam further down the tunnel, probing the dark water. Ripples disturbed the surface about 30 feet ahead, near where the tunnel curved slightly. Something pale and elongated broke the surface for a second, then submerged again. It looked disturbingly like an arm. A very long, very pale, multi-jointed arm. More limbs. Marcus whimpered, backing up until he bumped into Javi. "Keep quiet," Frank hissed. He motioned for everyone to stay put and edged forward slowly, keeping his light trained on the area where they'd seen the movement. He reached the bend in the tunnel. Peering cautiously around it, he scanned the water ahead. It was deeper here, perhaps knee-deep, and the source of the disturbance was visible, partially submerged near the far wall. It wasn't just an arm. It was a grotesque tangle of limbs, pale, fleshy arms and legs, some disturbingly human-like, others elongated or multi-jointed, fused together with pulsing sections of the gray wall flesh material and embedded shards of porcelain and metal. It looked like a nest or a colony of discarded parts, somehow animated and woven together. And nestled within the writhing mass, half hidden, were clusters of glass eyes, reflecting the flashlight beam with cold indifference. The weeping assemblage, or a variant adapted to this subterranean sewer. It didn't seem immediately aggressive, but pulsed slowly, limbs shifting and probing the water around it, occasionally releasing trails of oily bubbles. It blocked the tunnel almost completely. "Can we get past it?" Alina whispered, coming up beside Frank. Frank surveyed the narrow gap between the pulsing mass and the opposite wall. "Maybe. If we hug the wall, stay quiet, move slow. It doesn't seem to have noticed us yet." "Battery's getting low on the drone," Javi warned quietly. "Maybe 10 minutes left." "Okay," Frank decided. "Lights low, move one at a time. I'll go first. Alina, then Javi, then Marcus. Stay absolutely silent. Don't splash." He dimmed his flashlight beam slightly and began to edge forward, pressing himself flat against the slimy brick wall, moving with painstaking slowness through the knee-deep water. The assemblage pulsed. A long, pale arm unfurled slowly, reaching blindly towards the center of the tunnel, trailing ribbons of slime. Frank froze, holding his breath, until the limb retracted back into the main mass. He continued moving, step by agonizing step. He made it past the grotesque knot of limbs, reaching the slightly shallower water beyond. He turned, waving Alina forward cautiously. She followed, her face pale but determined, moving with equal care. She slipped once, making a small splash. Several glass eyes within the assemblage swiveled towards the sound. The mass pulsed slightly faster. Alina froze, then slowly continued, making it past to join Frank. Javi came next, holding the drone close to his body, its light shielded. He moved smoothly, focused. As he drew level with the assemblage, it shifted again. A cluster of porcelain fingers brushed against his leg underwater. He flinched violently but stifled a cry, scrambling the last few feet to safety. Only Marcus remained. He stared at the pulsating horror, paralyzed by fear. "I can't," he whispered, shaking his head. "Marcus, move," Frank urged in a harsh whisper. "Now." Spurred by Frank's command, Marcus started forward, but his movements were clumsy, panicked. He splashed loudly, stumbling in the uneven footing. The reaction from the assemblage was immediate. The entire mass surged, limbs whipping through the water, the glass eyes fixed on Marcus. A high-pitched keening sound, like weeping amplified through faulty speakers, emanated from the nest. Several limbs shot out, grasping towards him. "Run!" Frank yelled, abandoning stealth. He plunged back towards Marcus, grabbing his arm and hauling him forward. Alina shone her light back, trying to momentarily blind the creature. Javi raised the drone, its light flashing. Marcus screamed as a cold, strong limb wrapped around his ankle, pulling him off balance. He fell face first into the filthy water, thrashing and yelling. Frank strained to pull him free, wrench swinging defensively at the grasping limbs. Another limb, tipped with sharp metal hooks, snagged Frank's jacket, tearing the fabric. Suddenly, the drone, piloted expertly by Javi despite the chaos, swooped down low over the assemblage. Its rotors whipped up the stagnant water, creating a spray. More importantly, it emitted a high-pitched electronic whine, a diagnostic warning perhaps, amplified by the enclosed space. The assemblage reacted violently to the noise and the rotor wash. It recoiled, limbs flailing defensively, the keening sound rising in pitch. The limb holding Marcus's ankle loosened momentarily. Frank seized the chance, yanking Marcus free. He half-dragged, half-carried the sputtering, terrified developer away from the thrashing creature, back towards Alina and Javi. They scrambled further down the tunnel as the assemblage continued to flail in confusion, its weeping cries echoing horribly off the brickwork. They didn't stop until the sounds faded behind them, collapsing against the tunnel wall, chests heaving, soaked and filthy. Marcus was sobbing uncontrollably. Javi landed the drone nearby, its battery light now flashing critical red. "Okay," Frank gasped, catching his breath. "Okay, everyone all right." He checked himself, torn jacket, bruises, but intact. Alina seemed okay. Javi gave a shaky thumbs up. Marcus was traumatized but physically unharmed. "Drone's almost dead," Javi reported, powering it down to conserve the last few minutes. "We're blind after this." Frank nodded grimly. He shone his main flashlight beam ahead. The tunnel continued, but the air felt different, fresher. The constant dripping seemed less, and the smell, while still damp, lacked the chemical and organic foulness. And ahead, maybe 50 yards away, was a faint, pale glimmer of light. "Light," Alina breathed, pointing. "Is that daylight?" Hope, fragile but fierce, surged through them. They pushed themselves to their feet and began moving towards the distant glimmer, wading as quickly as they could through the water, which seemed shallower here. As they got closer, the light resolved into a definite source, a circular opening partially blocked by rusted bars and overgrown vegetation, set high in the tunnel wall. Daylight streamed through, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Below it, the tunnel floor became muddy gravel, the standing water finally receding. "An outflow grate," Frank exclaimed, "leading outside." They scrambled towards it, hope lending strength to their exhausted limbs. The grate was about 10 feet up the wall. The bars were thick, rusted, but potentially breakable. Below it, concrete steps, slick with moss, led up out of the receding water. Javi used the last dregs of the drone's battery to fly it up to the grate. Bars look thick, but the masonry around them is crumbling. Might be able to pry them loose. View outside. Looks like woods, dense undergrowth. Can't see the factory from here. "We can make it," Frank said, determination hardening his face. He looked at the steps, then hefted Sal's wrench. "Give me a boost." Working together, using the slippery steps, they managed to get Frank high enough to reach the grate. He began hammering at the crumbling brickwork around the rusted bars with the wrench, showering debris down on the others. It was slow, hard work, his arms burning with fatigue. Alina and Javi helped where they could, pulling at loose sections, using the knife to scrape mortar. Marcus huddled at the bottom of the steps, watching nervously. Suddenly, a low, heavy scraping sound echoed from the tunnel behind them. Deep, rhythmic, and disturbingly familiar. Frank froze, wrench poised. Everyone fell silent, listening. Scrape, thump, scrape, thump. It was distant but unmistakable. The sound of the tool golem. Had it somehow bypassed the blockage, Or was there another one? How? Javi whispered, horrified. It doesn't matter, Frank grunted, resuming his attack on the grate with renewed urgency. We're getting out now. He slammed the wrench against a rusted bar near where it entered the weakened brickwork. The metal groaned. He hit it again, harder. With a screech of protest, the bar bent outwards. He attacked the next one. The scraping sound grew louder, closer, echoing down the drainage tunnel towards them. Mixed with it now was the discordant humming, seeming to vibrate the very air. "It's coming," Marcus shrieked, pointing back into the darkness where Frank's flashlight beam didn't reach. Frank ignored him, focusing all his energy on the bars. Another one bent, just one more. He swung the wrench back for a final, powerful blow. Just as he did, a section of the tunnel ceiling directly above him cracked, groaned, and then collapsed inwards with a roar of falling brick and earth, burying the grate, the steps, and Frank himself in a shower of heavy debris. Darkness, dust, and the triumphant, discordant hum of the approaching golem filled the tunnel. Chapter 8: The Weight of Progress. Dust choked the air, thick and acrid, filling lungs, coating tongues. Elena coughed violently, the sound swallowed by the roar of settling debris and the triumphant, discordant hum vibrating through the very bricks of the tunnel. She groped blindly in the sudden darkness, her flashlight knocked from her hand by the force of the collapse. Panic seized her for a cold moment before training took over. Breathe. Assess. Survive. Her fingers closed around the familiar cylinder of her flashlight on the muddy floor. She thumbed it on, the beam cutting weakly through the swirling dust cloud. It illuminated chaos. A massive pile of earth, broken bricks, and splintered timbers choked the end of the tunnel, completely burying the area around the escape grate. Frank was somewhere underneath it all. "Frank," she yelled, her voice hoarse, scrambling towards the fresh rubble pile. "Frank, can you hear me?" Javi emerged from the dust cloud beside her, coughing, eyes wide with shock. He shone his phone's weak light onto the collapse. The whole ceiling came down. Is he? "I don't know." Elena clawed frantically at the loose earth on top, bricks shifting precariously. "Frank." From beneath the debris, muffled but distinct, came a low groan. "He's alive," Javi exclaimed, relief warring with terror. He started pulling at larger bricks near where the groan originated. Marcus huddled by the tunnel wall, hyperventilating, eyes darting between the rubble pile and the darkness behind them where the scrape, thump, of the approaching golem was already noticeably louder, closer. We have to go, it's coming, leave him." "Shut up, Marcus," Elena snapped, not looking away from the rubble. "Frank, talk to me, where are you hurt?" Another groan, followed by strained words muffled by earth and stone. "A leg, pinned, can't, breathe right, heavy." "We're getting you out," Elena promised, digging with renewed ferocity. Her bare hands soon scraped raw against the rough brick and stone. Javi joined her, tearing at the debris. They worked in frantic silence for a moment, the only sounds their ragged breaths, the shifting rubble, and the inexorable, rhythmic approach of the tool golem. The pile was immense, unstable. Dislodging one brick caused others to shift, threatening a further collapse. They lacked tools. The wrench Frank had been using was buried with him. Sal's knife, which Alina still had, was useless for moving heavy debris. Progress was agonizingly slow, measured in handfuls of dirt and dislodged stones. Scrape, thump, louder now. The discordant humming seemed to press in on them, a physical weight in the damp air. Vibrations traveled through the muddy floor, shaking the water around their ankles. "It's too close," Javi panted, glancing back down the tunnel. He couldn't see anything yet, but the sounds were terrifyingly near. "Frank, we don't have time." "Go," Frank's voice was weaker now, strained. "Get out." Grates weakened. Collapse might have loosened it more. "We're not leaving you," Alina yelled back, tears of frustration and fear stinging her eyes as she heaved uselessly at a large chunk of concrete. "No choice," Frank coughed, a wet, rattling sound. "Warn others, Lazarus, still alive." The scraping sound stopped abruptly. Silence fell, heavy and pregnant, broken only by Frank's labored breathing from beneath the rubble and Marcus's panicked whimpers. Then, the humming intensified, becoming a focused, dissonant drone. A shape began to resolve in the darkness at the tunnel's bend behind them. It was larger than it had appeared on the drone feed, a hulking silhouette against the faint light reflecting off the wet walls. As it shuffled forward, details emerged under Alina's flashlight beam. The fused mannequin and scrap metal torso, glistening with slime and something darker. The mismatched legs, one prosthetic, one metal strut, splashing through the water. The heavy hydraulic piston arm, ending in clamp-like fingers that opened and closed rhythmically. The other arm, the disturbingly lifelike porcelain limb, clutching the massive hammer, its head stained with concrete dust and something that looked disturbingly like dried blood. Wires snaked across its form, some sparking faintly, others disappearing into nodules of the gray, wall-flesh material that seemed to bind the disparate parts together. And the head, a cage of rusted rebar crudely welded atop the torso. Inside, the swirling mass of organic sludge, tissue, and components, eyes, gears, wires, shards of porcelain, pulsed with a faint internal luminescence. It emitted the low, multi-toned hum that seemed to vibrate directly in their bones. It smelled of ozone, hot metal, and decay, a smell that eclipsed the tunnel's natural dampness. The tool golem shuffled forward, its mismatched feet splashing heavily, its caged head swiveling slightly as if scanning the scene. Its optical sensors, crude lenses embedded in the swirling mass within the cage, seemed to fix first on the rubble pile, then on the three living humans standing before it. It showed no sign of haste, moving with a deliberate, mechanical gait that was somehow more terrifying than a rush. "Alina," Javi whispered, backing away slowly, pulling Marcus with him. Alina remained frozen for a heartbeat, caught between the buried Frank and the approaching monstrosity. Frank's words echoed, grates weakened, loosened it more. "Alina, use." The voice. Frank gasped from the rubble, his voice barely audible. "Finch's logs, frequency, overload." Frequency overload. She vaguely recalled reading something in the chaotic logs about the organic components being sensitive to specific sonic frequencies, causing temporary system conflicts or shutdowns in early prototypes. But how? They had nothing to generate such a sound. The golem raised its hammer arm slowly, deliberately. It wasn't aiming at them yet, but seemed to be assessing, calculating. Its clamp hand opened and closed. Click-clack, click-clack. Then Alina remembered Javi's drone, the high-pitched electronic whine it emitted when malfunctioning, the sound that had disoriented the weeping assemblage. The drone itself was dead, useless, but Javi still had his phone. Could it replicate the sound? Javi, Alina hissed, backing away towards him, keeping her light fixed on the golem. Your phone, does it have any diagnostic sounds? High-frequency test tones, anything loud and piercing? Javi fumbled with his phone, his fingers slipping on the wet screen. Diagnostics, I don't know, maybe. Apps, sound generator. He frantically tapped at the screen, sheltering it from the dripping water. The golem took another step forward. It lowered the hammer slightly and raised its other arm, the hydraulic piston. The clamp at the end opened wide, revealing sharpened inner edges. It seemed to be targeting Marcus, who was closest and radiating sheer terror, practically vibrating with fear. Hurry, Alina urged, grabbing the knife from her belt. A pathetic weapon against this thing, but better than nothing. Got it, Javi exclaimed. Sound generator app, setting frequency, max volume. The golem lunged, not fast but with unstoppable mechanical force. The clamp shot towards Marcus. Marcus screamed, a high-pitched sound of pure terror, stumbling backwards, tripping over his own feet, falling into the shallow water at the tunnel edge. Javi stabbed a button on his phone screen. An ear-splitting shriek erupted from the phone's small speaker. High-pitched, wavering, painfully loud in the enclosed tunnel. It wasn't just noise. It felt like needles piercing the eardrums. The effect on the golem was instantaneous and violent. The humming sound faltering, dissolving into static-laced screeches. The swirling mass in its head cage pulsed erratically, the internal light flashing wildly. The golem staggered, its movements becoming jerky, uncoordinated. The clamp arm retracted spasmingly. The hammer arm swung wildly, smashing against the tunnel wall, sending bricks flying. It stumbled back a step, its whole frame shuddering. It's working, Alina yelled over the shriek. Keep it going. Javi held the phone aloft like a weapon, the noise continuing. The golem seemed caught in a loop, staggering, limbs flailing non-functionally, its head cage flickering like a broken strobe light. The Great, Alina shouted, seizing the chance. She scrambled back to the rubble pile, ignoring the golem's chaotic flailing nearby. Frank, we need the wrench. Oh, beside me, Frank choked out. Alina dug frantically where he indicated, feeling the solid metal shape beneath the loose debris. She pulled hard. The wrench came free. She looked up at the grate, partially visible through the hole Frank had started making before the collapse buried it. The collapse had weakened the surrounding structure significantly. Several bars were bent outwards already. Javi, cover me, Alina yelled. She climbed onto the unstable rubble, using footholds where she could, reaching the bent bars. She jammed the head of the wrench into a gap between a bar and the crumbling brickwork and heaved with all her might. The golem, still spasming under the sonic assault, took a lurching step sideways. Its flailing hammer arm connected with a large, load-bearing ceiling pipe running the length of the tunnel. The pipe buckled with a deafening groan. Water sprayed from the rupture. More importantly, the impact sent shockwaves through the already unstable ceiling. Directly above the golem, a fresh crack appeared. Javi saw it. Elena, look out. With another roar, a second section of the ceiling gave way, much larger than the first. Bricks, earth, and heavy sections of the buckled pipe rained down directly onto the tool golem. The creature was engulfed. The shrieking sound from Javi's phone was abruptly cut off as the phone was knocked from his hand by falling debris, landing screen down in the muddy water, silenced. The golem disappeared under the tons of falling material with a final, grinding metallic screech. Silence descended, broken only by the hiss of spraying water from the ruptured pipe and the settling of the new debris pile. Elena clung to the grate, showered in dust but miraculously unharmed by the second collapse. Javi scrambled back, avoiding the worst of it. Marcus, still lying in the water, seemed frozen in shock. The golem was gone, buried even more thoroughly than Frank. Frank, Elena called down breathlessly, hope surging. Maybe the second collapse had shifted the debris pinning him. A silence. Frank, she yelled again, sliding down the rubble pile. No response. She shone her light on the area where he'd been buried. The new collapse had added tons more weight, shifted the original pile. The small space where he might have been able to breathe was likely gone. Elena felt a cold dread wash over her. She knew, with sickening certainty, that Frank Ramirez was dead, crushed by the very factory he'd come to demolish. Javi reached the same conclusion, his face crumpling. He retrieved his mud-caked, silent phone, staring numbly at its cracked screen. A choked sob came from Marcus. He slowly, shakily pushed himself up from the water, covered in mud and filth, staring at the two mountains of rubble that now blocked the tunnel in both directions. "Trapped," he whispered hoarsely. "Still trapped." Elena ignored him. Grief was a luxury they couldn't afford. Frank's sacrifice, intentional or not, had bought them a chance. She looked up at the grate again. The second collapse hadn't buried it completely, and the impact seemed to have loosened the bars even further. One more push. "Javi," she said, her voice tight, holding back the grief. "Help me with this grate, now." Together, using the wrench, their combined weight and sheer desperation, they attacked the remaining bars. The metal screeched, bent, and finally, one bar tore free from the crumbling masonry with a satisfying crack. Then another. They created a gap just wide enough to squeeze through. Cool, fresh air flowed down, carrying the scent of damp earth, trees, and rain. Freedom was inches away. "Go," Elena urged Javi, pushing him towards the opening. Javi hesitated, looking back towards the pile burying Frank, then squeezed through the gap, disappearing outside. Elena turned to Marcus, who was still standing numbly, staring at the rubble. "Marcus, come on, it's clear." Marcus didn't move. He just shook his head slowly, a strange emptiness in his eyes. "Lofts," he muttered nonsensically. "Exposed brick. Good bones," he chuckled, a hollow, broken sound. "Character." "Marcus." Elena grabbed his arm, trying to pull him towards the opening. He resisted, listless. Behind them, from deep within the second rubble pile, The one burying the golem came a low, grinding sound, a single metallic scraping noise, followed by another. It wasn't dead. Marcus. Elena screamed, abandoning him. She scrambled frantically towards the opening, hauling herself up. She squeezed through the narrow gap, tearing her clothes, scraping her skin, tumbling out onto wet leaves and soft earth on the other side. She landed hard, gasping for breath, the cool, clean air a shock after the fetid tunnels. Javi helped her up. They were in dense woods, ferns and thorny bushes pressing close. Rain fell softly through the canopy overhead. There was no sign of the factory, only trees and dripping undergrowth. Elena looked back at the grate. Marcus Thorne stood framed in the opening, looking not out at them but back into the darkness of the tunnel. A faint, discordant humming started up again from the depths, barely audible over the rain. Marcus smiled, a faint, vacant smile. Then, with a final, metallic screech, something large and dark surged upwards behind him within the tunnel. Marcus's smile vanished, replaced by brief, stark terror, before he was violently yanked back into the darkness. His scream was cut off abruptly. Silent, except for the rain and the wind in the trees. Elena didn't wait. She grabbed Javi's arm. "Run," she choked out. They ran. They crashed through the undergrowth, ignoring the branches that tore at them, fueled by adrenaline and primal fear. They didn't know where they were going, only away. Away from the grate, away from the tunnels, away from the factory hidden somewhere behind them in the rain-soaked woods. They ran until their lungs burned and their legs gave out, collapsing miles away, or perhaps only yards. It was impossible to tell. In a muddy clearing as dusk began to settle, turning the rain gray and chilling them to the bone. They huddled together, shivering, listening. The sounds of the woods, rain, wind, distant animals seemed alien loud. But beneath them, or perhaps only in their minds, they could almost hear it. A faint, discordant hum, a rhythmic click, thump. Javi coughed, a harsh, rattling sound disturbingly similar to Sal's final moments. Elena looked at a deep scratch on her arm from the grate, already red and inflamed, feeling strangely numb. They had escaped Lazarus Limbs Co., but the chilling certainty settled upon them that perhaps the factory, in its own symbiotic, decaying way, hadn't finished letting them go. The weight of progress, Finch's progress, was a heavy burden to carry out into the world. The end.